Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Aranda came to her senses from time to time. Her head throbbed on the pillow. She heard voices, someone calling for a doctor, and then the lapse again. It was as if the girl was in a delirium. She didn't remember what was happening to her. Aranda opened her eyes. It was very painful. Her eyelids seemed to be filled with lead, and she had to make a great effort to see through the slit to the room she was in. After a while, the girl remembered that she was in a hospital. Someone approached her. After a few minutes, Aranda noticed someone in a white coat appear next to her. The doctor examined her, said something to the nurse, and left. She immediately rushed to set a new bottle on the IV stand. I tried to say her lips were pressed together, and she was very thirsty. She jerked one hand to touch her stomach, but it was as if her body wasn't listening. Lie still, someone ordered her, and returned her hand to its place, or I'll tie you up. Tears ran down Aranda's cheeks. She wanted to scream. The girl felt like there was no longer a baby in her belly. Maybe I've already given birth, it occurred to her, and she began to calm down. By evening, Aranda could say something, or rather whisper something. She asked the nurse where her daughter was. Would they bring her to you later? She tried to smile. Until you get up, you won't see the baby. Aranda tried to focus on her body. She needed to recover, or she would not see her daughter for a long time. It had been almost a week, and she was slowly but still on the mend. She could talk a little. She had more strength. I want to see my daughter, she said to the doctor as he examined her. The man was silent. He took a deep breath. Then a look of total indifference came over his face. Unfortunately, the baby was stillborn, he finally said. Everything turned over in Aranda's head, and she lost consciousness. Time passed. Aranda began to regain consciousness. She didn't have the strength to sob or cry. She felt like the living dead. It seemed that every cell inside her had died. Aranda, as the girl was called, had lived in the city for over 7 years. Her great-grandfather was from Italy many years ago. He had moved to California. Then the girl's grandmother married an American and settled in a small town on the shore of the Pacific Ocean. From there, the younger generation traveled all over the country. Aranda's grandmother had 7 children. One of them became the girl's father. He was the one who gave her such a name to maintain the connection of times and generations. Aranda had absolutely no features peculiar to Italians, except her eyes. If you look at them closely, a little like huge tonsils. The girl could be called beautiful, but Aranda never took advantage of her beauty. In general, she had always dreamed of returning to her grandmother's town and opening a hotel on the shore. Memories of the ocean always saved her in the most difficult moments. Unfortunately, Aranda's father was in the military. Their final resting place was Chicago. A couple of times as a child, Aranda was at her grandmother's house, and it made such an impression on her that the girl fell in love with the ocean forever. But then she went to college. Her father and mother dreamed that Aranda would stay with them, but the eternal winter so depressed the girl that she did everything to leave this harsh land. Although Aranda did not manage to go very far, but she took a risk and settled in Los Angeles. From there, it seemed to her, it wasn't far to the ocean anymore. Although, despite the fact that Aranda had already lived in this city for almost 7 years, she had only traveled to her grandmother's house 5 times. Upon arriving in what seemed to Aranda to be a huge city at the time, she took a job as a cook's assistant at a small cafe. She quickly realized that she would not earn much from this, and began to try herself as a waitress. Thanks to her looks, she quickly managed to get a job in an expensive restaurant. Tips there left good, and 2 years later the girl took a studio on credit. She lived alone. All her requests for her parents to move in with her, or even to her grandmother, ended in refusal. Neither her father and mother nor her older brother wanted to leave Chicago. Aranda was the only one who couldn't stand the cold climate, and the rest of her family very much enjoyed the eternal winter. 2 weeks ago, when Aranda had just been admitted to the hospital, she had called her mother and grandmother and warned them that she would contact them herself when she felt better. Her mother immediately went to see her, but Aranda asked her not to come yet. She would need her help. After their daughter was born, they had agreed that Vanessa would take a vacation and come to see her. Now it turned out that the mother would have to quit her job for 2 months. No one would let her go. Nevertheless, as much as Aranda was in pain, she immediately wrote to her mother that she had lost the baby and so dropped everything and flew to her. Aranda, she stroked her head. Well, why don't you come to our place or grandma's? Mom, I have to finish paying off my loan. I'll manage, she answered quietly. Uncle Ethan has already come several times. They support me here. A few days later, my father arrived. On his passport, his name was Nicholas, and his grandmother called him, as it is supposed to be, also Nicholas. In general, we can say that no one knew either tradition or language. The grandmother's eldest son, Ethan, had been to the historical homeland several times. He was the only one who could say something in Italian. The parents were worried sick about Aranda. Not only that, but she hadn't found a place to be since Roger had disappeared. And then there was the new grief. Be that as it may, the death of a child along with her loved ones was easier on Aranda. After she was discharged from the hospital, the girl received an urn with the ashes of her daughter. The relatives held a ritual. Buried the child in a cemetery in New York. The parents took the straw and drove towards Florida. There, their grandmother, Uncle Ethan, who lived with her with his family, was already waiting for them. Another of their father's brothers from Boston and a sister from Miami had also arrived. Grandma Lorraine was 88 and still looked fine. "My dear girl," she hugged her. "How worried we all were about you." "It's okay, Grandma," she whispered through her tears. "Thank you for your support." Homemade wine poured down the river. Of course, it would be nice to meet on another occasion, but no one knows where life will turn tomorrow. Aranda looked at all her relatives and felt a strong inner pain. All the cousins and siblings were sitting families with children, except she was the only one who was out of luck. Aranda Uncle Ethan sat down next to her. "Why don't you come over? I'll find money to pay off your loan, sell your apartment, and open your own cafe." "Uncle, thank you." She bumped her face into his chest. "But I want to stay in New York. Are you still waiting for him?" He sighed. "My girl, I'd give anything to have him come back to you. Brandon would do the same." The whole thing with Roger seemed very strange. It was such a great start. Aranda never thought it was possible to be so happy. And so, though the girl realized it herself. After all, she was almost 26 at that moment. That the guy's parents were against Roger knew a lot of people. In New York, at least, their sausages were known to everyone, and not just at home, but even in some states. "Oh, Aranda," said the mother excitedly, and when her daughter told her that she was going to marry a sausage oligarch. "Mom, Roger gave up all of his father's fortune," she objected immediately. "He doesn't work for his company at all." And it was true. At the age of 18, Roger's father put him in front of a difficult choice. He had to start an apprenticeship and work in his business. "You will study at the institute, and after that you will be trained in our office," Anthony told him dryly. "Do you think I will support you all the time?" "I don't think so," replied the son calmly. "But you never asked me if I wanted to do it." "It's not even up for discussion," Roger's father immediately replied. "You are the son of a famous man. You can't choose. Your life was determined from the beginning." The more the boy grew up, the more he realized that he was not interested in his father's wealth or his sausage. "Leave me alone," the son argued with him. "Let your son-in-law inherit your business." "I don't want to do it." Roger had 2 older sisters. The first had already married, and the guy hoped that his father would leave him alone, but he started pushing Roger even harder. Total control. That's what Anthony was doing. The son realized that his parent was a pretty tough person. He had tried many times to talk to his mother, but to no avail. She, too, was afraid of her husband. At times he seemed sensual and principled, so Roger lived in great tension until he graduated from the institute. By this time, his second sister had already married, and it seemed that Anthony liked the new son-in-law much more than the first. In a family like Roger's, there could be no accidental marriages. Everything was arranged solely by calculation. But in vain, Roger hoped for his father's favor, and that he would let him go when he turned 25. In addition to his father's business, there were plans to marry him. "I'll never marry her," Roger shouted. "You can even hang me in my room." "Don't talk nonsense," Anthony replied calmly. "Roger will still be my way, so let's not get on each other's nerves." "I swear to God I'll never marry Lauren," he said angrily, and ran out of the house. Roger had never been a daddy's boy. He didn't hang out in nightclubs or get into bad company, so it was hard for Anthony to manipulate him. Roger seemed like the perfect son. This flattered his father even more, but at the same time it made control more difficult. Scandals became more frequent. Roger deliberately stopped coming to the office. Anthony started threatening him. "If you go against me," he clenched his fists, "I will not look that you are my son." "But can you bring your gun that's in your drawer right now?" shouted the son loudly. "I'll even put my own chest to you myself. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Remember that." Anthony angrily ran out of Roger's room. The latter shoved some things into his bag, grabbed his cell phone, and left. "I'm not coming back here again," he said to himself. "Let his thugs nail me somewhere. But I won't live by his laws. The bastard is not my father. I don't want to see him again." The young man stopped outside a restaurant. He was not a fan of such places. He looked in his wallet. There was $1,000 in cash. There was a distinctive sound. He got a message on his phone that his card was blocked. "Fuck you," Roger swore. "I'll get something to eat here and go wherever I want." Roger didn't realize at that moment that he had stopped at an expensive restaurant. He looked at the menu and realized that with what he had now, he couldn't afford to eat properly. The young man was about to get up and leave when a waitress approached him with a mineral water. "Please," she said. "Still decided to choose something. If you can have a cold one," he replied. "Thank you." The pretty girl quickly brought him water and a couple more cookies. The guy thanked her, left the restaurant and dialed his friend. He didn't answer for a long time, but the young man kept calling. "Hey, Thomas." "Buddy, you can't help me," Roger said hopefully. "What's wrong?" came from the other end. "We're in Spain. We'll be back next week." "All right. I'm sorry to bother you," Roger sighed. "It's all right. I'll tell you about it when I see you." The young man called a couple more acquaintances, but he was disappointed there too. He started the car. It jerked and stopped. The boy cursed. But what was the law of meanness? It was out of gas, and the car wouldn't budge. For the first time in his life, Roger was in such a difficult situation. He was promised to bring the money, but only tomorrow. The guy looked at his watch. It was already the beginning of 10. Parking near the restaurant was free. He got out every now and then to stretch his legs or go to the restaurant's restroom. "I'm an idiot," he said to himself. "I should have taken something before I left home. I'd have taken something to a pawn shop by now. I've got nothing but a couple of clothes and a cell phone." He paid for the whole car, but he couldn't find anything expensive, and selling the phone was a total reckless act. Roger was nervous, but he didn't want to go home. "I'd rather starve to death somewhere than put my life in his hands," he said to himself. The night passed uneasily. The young man slept in the car, waking up now and then. It was not yet 6 o'clock when he got out and began to walk back and forth. There was a bench near the restaurant. He sat down on it, and someone touched his shoulder. "Wake up. The receptionist is coming to make a scene," said the stranger. Roger opened his eyes. A girl stood in front of him. He thought he had seen her before. "You work here, don't you?" He pointed to the door. "Please, give me some water. I'll pay you. I still have some money left." "Don't you have a place to live?" she asked in amazement. "You don't look like a homeless person, do you?" "Yes, I left home side. I'd rather be homeless than live in the family of an oligarch like my father." The girl left. 10 minutes later, she brought a large bottle of water and food. "Oh, thank you very much." The young man froze in amazement. "Here, take it." He handed the waitress $500. "No need. Let it be on the house," she smiled. "Enjoy your meal." "I'm supposed to get the money today. I hope I can get a room and get a good night's sleep," Roger said, munching on his sandwich. Several times the young man started his own business, but his father quickly found out about it. He made sure Roger sold everything and went bankrupt. "You'll only work for our company," Anthony always said. "You have no other way." Father would quickly learn that Roger was trying to move some money overseas. Apparently, not only was he keeping tabs on him, but he had people everywhere from the bank to the police. So Roger was still completely dependent on Anthony. But that was exactly what his father wanted. The day passed quickly. But unfortunately, an acquaintance called and said that he had not been able to find the right amount of money, how much Roger asked for. The only thing left was to wait for Thomas to return. "Maybe I should sell the car and leave here for good." In a fit of despair, he thought. From time to time, the young man came into the restaurant on his own business. The waitress saw with what displeasure the receptionist looked at him. "You'd better leave here," she came out to the stranger. "I'm afraid they might call the police." "That's the thing, I can't." "I'm out of gas." Roger lowered his head. "Okay, I'll think of something." She ran off and came back a couple hours later. "I said you're my boyfriend and you're waiting for me, having come from far away," she said. "If you want, I'll give you some money and you can go to some gas station nearby." "No, I can't do that," Roger answered her. "But if you'll only lend me the money, so be it." She slipped him a couple thousand. "If you still can't find anything, wait for me here tonight. We'll work something out." Roger had walked about 5 kilometers when a gas station appeared ahead. He took a bottle of gasoline so he could drive here and fill up properly. There, he smiled as he drove his car up to the restaurant. "It's like I've got no legs. I'll wait for her. Maybe she'll rent out more than one room. I need a place to stay for a while to decide what to do next." In fact, Roger would like to go to Italy. He was secretly looking for a job there. His profession was in the food industry. He was also supposed to have a second degree in business. Anthony could not allow him to run his company without proper training. But since Roger categorically did not want to get involved with his father, he looked for ways to escape from him. The young man didn't really delve into his father's empire, but he had heard rumors that here and there, Anthony was taking over medium-sized meatpacking businesses. Roger was no fool. Knowing his father, it was safe to assume his hands were unclean, and especially if even some police officer shook his hand with both hands, that could tell a lot. It often seems that if a person is doing legitimate things, he cannot commit crimes or play business by the rules. Just the opposite is often the case. Big business is a separate planet, and it has its own laws. You can easily be swallowed up if you show weakness or refuse to abide by the accepted norms. So bankruptcy, setups, or even worse, these are, you might say, the costs of production. And any tycoon knew that. It's just that even among big businessmen, there were those who somehow wanted to improve their lives and enjoyed their work. But there were also those who could be called predators. These lived only for themselves and to make as much money as possible. Roger's father was one of the latter. Anthony didn't care what the cost was. If he had something in mind, he had to carry out his plan. And if small fish got in his way, he ruthlessly tore their heads off. Who was hurt by Anthony? He was feared. His inhumanity seemed to know no bounds. Even his son sometimes felt disturbed by his presence. Roger often imagined his father as some kind of horror movie monster. Roger's problem was that he believed in the goodness of people, and having no inner difference, the guy thought that any person sooner or later must change, become kind and good. But instead of developing his differences and recognizing people, he adopted this false belief, which led to a series of tragic events in his life. There are people who are very sly and cunning, who can put one's guard down with their promises or false nobility. And then, a person ceases to discern. Intuition falls asleep, and the poor man falls into a trap. A waitress ran out of the restaurant and brought something in a bag. Quickly, she looked back. "I have to go get something to eat. And there's water," she said quickly. "Did you manage to buy gas?" "Yes, I'll be waiting for you. I'm sorry, we still haven't met," the young man smiled. "Aranda," the girl said as she walked. "That's it. No need to go." She walked with a quick step. When the stranger's voice caught up with her, Roger shouted, "Hey, I'll be here." He waved goodbye to her. Aranda went back to her work. She felt genuinely sorry for the young man. Something told her he wasn't lying. The girl didn't suffer from a lack of attention, but her relationships with guys somehow didn't work out. 3 years ago, she dated Andrew. He worked as a waiter too, but she found out very quickly that he was dating another girl at the same time. All in all, Brandon hadn't disappointed. She decided to focus on work for now to pay off the loan. The rest was for later. She made a good amount of money that day. Roger seemed to have brought her luck. The girl ran out of the cafe. The familiar car was still standing there. "I'll give you a ride," Roger told her. Aranda handed him a bag of dinner. Good, she got into the expensive car. "Then we'll figure something out on the spot," Aranda said. Arianda's mind had already flashed to where she could put her new acquaintance. She had a tiny room in her studio, but since there wasn't much furniture, she decided to put her guest near the window. Especially it was summer, so nothing terrible would happen to him. "I'm very sorry to disturb you," said Roger, blushing. "I'm sorry to have fallen on your head." "That's all right." Then it was meant to be, Aranda replied calmly. "Go take a shower, I'll set the table." "I'm tired," she said. "God, I've been longing for hot tea." Roger stuffed the candy in his mouth. "I now understand how the homeless live, but it's not an easy subject," the hostess immediately replied. "You know, I've been working in a restaurant for a long time, and we get all kinds of people. There are, however, those who are in trouble, and there are those who just like to live like that. You don't have to take responsibility, work, think about tomorrow. Unfortunately, such people are the majority, but there are some decent people. They pass some important lesson in their life. That's why it's not shameful to be homeless. No one knows what will happen to each of us tomorrow." "I would have preferred to be born to ordinary parents," to Roger sighed. "People don't realize that wealth also comes at a price. Of course, there are normal people among the rich. A friend of mine married an ordinary girl. My father didn't mind, but not mine. He stands out for his integrity, even among his own." Brandon did not specify who Roger's father was. And anyway, she didn't care at the time. What difference did it make? She would help a man, and then he would probably disappear from her life forever. Both the girl and her guest fell asleep as soon as their heads touched the pillow. The next day, Aranda had the day off and stayed home. She and Roger got up late. The young men had been traveling for the last few days and they wanted to get some sleep. "Shall we get up?" Aranda smiled, looking at her watch. It was already the beginning of 12. They had breakfast or lunch. At almost 1 o'clock, Roger sat sad. Every now and then he glanced at the phone, hoping that someone he knew would still be able to lend him money. "I'm not coming home," he said. "At least not until my father recognizes my freedom. I find it hard to believe that you, a man who is used to a lot of money and power, would admit your guilt." Aranda sighed. "Roger, you need to stop believing that." "Yes, perhaps you're right," he lowered his head. "I've been hoping for it for so many years, but alas, time goes by and he's only getting worse. I don't know what to do. I wanted to go abroad, but in my impulse I didn't take anything with me. Only my passport. I don't want to go back home to get my documents. I don't know what to expect from my father. Roger, I realize this is going to sound cruel, but you have to accept reality." The girl looked intently into his eyes. "What do you mean?" He didn't understand her thoughts, like bees by the hundreds swirling in his head. "Do you need a job?" "Anything." She kept her eyes on him. "Roger, if you want to be independent from him, you'll do anything." "I don't even know where I can go," he asked pleadingly. "I can't get a job with a company. All my papers are at home." "But you have hands, rely on them for now. Go to work at least as a loader. No one will need your diplomas there," she laughed. Roger had never thought of that before. His first thought was that he had fallen too low. "What's wrong with carrying something?" Aranda asked him. "That way you'll always rely only on yourself." Not on your father's leniency, and you'll always have money. Yes, not $1 million, but still the guest asked timidly about such a job. We'll get it organized right away, Aranda replied. She grabbed the phone and called a guy who worked for them. Frank, hi. Listen, I really need to help someone out. Why don't you take him on as a trucking partner? Yeah, you're off today too. The girl put the phone aside, satisfied. They often called to work one guy who did their transportation or collected all sorts of garbage in the car. Do you have anything besides that? Aranda looked at Roger's expensive clothes. Wouldn't those be good for work? No, he shrugged. Yeah, that shirt isn't new. He began to look at his clothes, so scratched his head, pants and shirt against Aranda's. I'll give you this, one of my brothers. He's been coming over, helping me do some remodeling. As soon as Frank calls you, you go to the address. He'll explain everything to you. Indeed, no sooner had Aranda found the old clothes than her phone rang immediately. Roger needed to go downtown. There he and Frank would remove branches from the cut trees. The young man left the car near a large store and ran to look for a new job. You, Roger, a tall guy of about 24, waved at him. Come here, Frank. He held out his hand to Roger. So, look, we follow them. We gather branches, throw them in the tractor. Don't stand under the tree, or something might fall on your head. They've been a bit of a surprise this year. Maybe they haven't had the money for a long time. Usually they call me in late April, May. Work's been boiling over. Roger didn't expect to be doing this kind of work himself. By evening, he was tired. His arms and legs were buzzing. Well, see you tomorrow. Frank shouted goodbye to him and jumped into the tractor cab. Roger stood looking at the money he had earned. He had been paid $1,550,000 for 5 hours of work. My God, how do they live on that? Roger muttered to himself. Aranda was right. He should have accepted the realities of life. No more illusions. They were giving him nothing but precious time. Despite the fact that Roger was uncomfortable, he decided to continue working as a loader and laborer for the time being. Brandon spent the rest of the day doing housework, cleaning the apartment, going to the store, cooking dinner. Roger came home, red from his tan. He could barely lift his hand to dial the apartment number. Aha, Aranda exclaimed when she saw her guest. Yes, hard work doesn't make anyone look good, she sighed. Let's shower and have dinner. God, I'm going to starve to death, moaned the boy. Frank, get some water. We only had warm water left at the end. I couldn't drink it. They ate their supper, and Roger collapsed exhausted on his makeshift bed. This isn't like sitting in an office, he groaned, though it would do me good too. He turned to Aranda, who was also lying down on her couch. You know, for the first few months I came home from work and just cried. She smiled. I had no strength at all. I thought I'd give up tomorrow. And then I got involved. Of course, I'm not going to work as a waitress all my life, pay off the loan, and I want to try something. I'm a cook by training, but I definitely don't want to work in that field. And what would you like to do? With interest asked the guy, putting his hand under his head. I love flowers, but I don't have time for them now, she pointed somewhere with her hand. There was a dry hulk, so with my schedule, I don't really have time for them. Andrew, would you like to grow them or sell them? I mean, open a flower store. Roger didn't quite understand her. I don't know, Aranda shrugged. It would be great to open a nursery, or at least a marketplace. And what would you like to do? Certainly not sausages and sausages, he laughed. Frank, I used to love to draw, but my father said it was not serious. How interesting. Aranda got ready to hear something exciting. What did you draw? Anything I saw. Roger laughed. I like to sketch our garden, our old cat Bernard and our dog Jessica, then drawing my friends. Did you go to art school? Aranda interrupted him. I'm sure you were good at drawing. No, my father put me in boxing. I trained there for 3 years and quit. Roger sighed. Could you go back to your drawings? A thought occurred to Aranda. Look, can we give you some publicity? If you draw a couple of paintings for our restaurant, and we can hang them up, I'm sure it would work. I don't even know. Do I need materials? Roger wondered. He gave all the money he earned to the girl. If I make money tomorrow, I'll try to buy something. I'll have to see. Maybe I've already forgotten how to draw, laughed the guest. Well, such things are not forgotten. Immediately refuted his pessimism Aranda. It's like riding a bicycle. Even in old age. Sit down, your legs will still pedal, right? The young men talked until 11 o'clock and did not notice how they fell asleep. The next day, Frank called Roger at 7 o'clock. The day promised to be very busy. By 8, the guy had already left, and Aranda had one more day off. She decided to give Roger a present. She finished cooking and went to the market. There she chose a simple t-shirt, sports pants for her new acquaintance. Then she went to the artist store. Roger had described to her yesterday roughly what he needed, so it was easy for her to buy some materials for his work. And the young man had perhaps the most difficult day of all. Yes, he managed to make $3,000, but he was completely exhausted. First, he and Frank loaded 2 moves. Then they were called to a huge warehouse. There they had to collect garbage, put it in a Kamazi truck, which then took it all to the dumpster. Roger got in the truck and got stuck. Yes, his new life was not sweet. How easy it was for him to live a life without worries. That's all it took for me to accept my father's condition. No, I'd rather pull garbage, he said to himself. At least I'm free now. All through dinner, Aranda smiled enigmatically. Finally, she brought Roger a package. Frank, thank you. He couldn't stand it and hugged her like an old friend. In spite of the fact that I have no strength, I want to try. The young man thought for a few minutes, then put a chair and asked the girl to sit down with easy movements. With small strokes, he drew her image on the paper. His hands were covered with colored dust, but it did not embarrass him at all. There, he said and sighed. It's been a long time since I painted, so don't judge me harshly. Aranda, holding her breath, approached him. She was ready for a classical portrait, but this was so unusual. You know, at first I thought you drew me in the image of some anime, but now I realize that's not true, she said faintly. The portrait was drawn in brown and green tones, and my hair was the color of mint. I like it. She took a closer look. It's so unusual. Roger, isn't it great? It's very modern, very fresh. The young man was embarrassed. He was usually told that he had a strange way of looking at things and people. The boy never painted what he saw with his eyes. He drew what he felt. It's just the way I see you, he said quietly. I associate you with greenery, with nature. Why? Aranda wondered. No one has ever told me before that I'm like nature. I don't know. You smell fresh like green moss. You're peaceful, Roger tried to describe his feelings. I also feel concentrated. I don't know how to explain it. I see you as an arrow that hits the target. You can only achieve that when you're focused on something. I never thought of myself that way at all, Aranda said. It was all very strange to her, but she was very happy to hang her unusual portrait over the sofa. It seemed to hang there all the time. The next day at work, the girl kept coming back to what Roger had told her. He may be right, she thought. Not everyone can stand working as a waiter, and I somehow managed to do it. I can stay calm even in very difficult situations. She had had 2 unpleasant incidents in her career, but Aranda remained calm, not cold-blooded. However, this quality has helped her a lot in life. That day she came home late. She left the keys with Roger. He worked until noon, and after lunch he and Frank had no orders. Roger had been painting the whole time. Aranda bought him some good paper. Dry crayons. The boy didn't want to mess with watercolors yet, and dry crayons appealed to him more than uncontrolled paint splatters. When Aranda got home, Roger was sitting on the floor, and it had been so long since he had indulged in his favorite work that he pounced on his work like a hungry man, mechanically opened Aranda's door and went back to painting. He wanted to finish the last work. It was the 5th in a row. Aranda did not stand still when she saw the paintings and scattered crayons on the floor. Life itself breathed colors on her. Roger, this is beautiful, was all the landlady could utter. I'm not that good at art, but they look amazing. In the morning, Aranda asked the boy's permission to show his work to the restaurant manager. Very nice, Vanessa smiled contentedly. I'll talk to the owner. If he agrees to give them to us, then we'll give him a good advertisement. Only we need to frame them and put them under glass. Pastels can crumble over time. And Roger had another day's work, just as Aranda had said. His body was slowly getting used to physical activity. The lad's life was beginning to change slowly, but still, he didn't think about his father or his mother at all. No one called him, and Roger completely immersed himself in his work. This idiot is totally determined to embarrass me, Anthony raged. He watched his son's every move and knew what he was doing. The self-confident businessman was sure that Roger would be without him for a few days at most, and then he would apologize to him. But what his son had done was beyond all bounds of decency. In Anthony's eyes, Roger had dishonored him. I need to get him back at any cost, he said. Chelsea, call him. Say whatever you want to say to him, just so that this... He swore. He stayed home. We're planning a wedding for next year. I don't want Filato to hear a rumor. He won't even talk to me, objected the wife. You know, he is stubborn, all in you. All right. Then I'll take care of this puppy myself. Anthony threw a grudge. I'm so sick of him. Why didn't you give me another son? But that's not my problem. You are responsible for the sex of the child. She threw it. It would be better if he was born a girl. The husband didn't stop. I would not have been so offended then. Well, he would have been a girl. She threw him out of the room. Who's to say he wouldn't have a taste? Anthony sat down on the couch, clutching his head. Things weren't going his way. One of the daughter's serious health problems had surfaced. Business somehow began to fade. Prices went up and people started buying less meat. And then there's Roger. I've got to do something about him, he said out loud. If I don't break him now, I might lose him altogether. Threats won't get through to him. I've learned that. Anthony had been hatching his plan for nearly 2 days. He would have to humiliate himself in front of his son to some extent, but there was no other way. Roger could live without him and his money. There was no doubt about that anymore, so there was no way to take him by force. All right, I'll do it, but later. You'll answer for everything. He clenched his hand into a fist. "You little bastard. You'll learn how to go against me." Roger was the happiest that day. They hung his 4 paintings early in the morning on the walls of the restaurant where Aranda worked. Each one bore his personal signature. "You will definitely do well," whispered Aranda. "Roger, do you have talent?" The guy had thanked her for everything a few days ago and promised that he would move out soon, but Aranda had insisted that he stay with her at least for a couple months while Naomi raised enough money for the first time. Roger hugged his friend. He was so thrilled that such a miracle had happened to him. "It's beautiful." The receptionist smiled contentedly. "But at least we owe you lunch," she laughed. Roger didn't mind. He took the bag of food and went to work. And Aranda started her shift that day. The girl walked to the door of the restaurant. She opened it ajar to see Roger leave and noticed someone approaching the young man. "Roger, I was wrong," the father said to his son. "I realize I've often pressured you, but come on, come home. I promise. Everything will be different now." The boy was silent. For the first time in his life, he heard Anthony apologize. There was hope in his heart. "I'll come back tonight and we'll talk," he said calmly. "Right now I have to go to work." His father cursed to himself, but now he had to play by the rules. Roger was about 8 when he brought the keys to Aranda. He informed her that his father had admitted his mistakes, but asked him to come home. "Thank you for everything." The boy looked intently into her eyes. "If it hadn't been for you." The girl's lips trembled. She wanted to scream in pain. Suddenly Roger reached out and stroked Aranda's face. "We'll see each other again," he promised. "Frank, I will talk to you later." Roger went back to his parents' house. He hadn't called Aranda for almost 2 days. She was very worried about him. Every now and then the girl took out her portrait, which Roger had drawn, and pressed it to her breast. "I love you," Aranda whispered. "You are the best thing in my life." And she cried. 3 days passed, and an expensive car stopped outside a restaurant. Roger walked in. He looked gorgeous, and he was holding a huge bouquet of roses. "Hi," Aranda rushed to meet him. "I've been waiting for you." She couldn't hide her feelings any longer. "Frank, I love you," Roger whispered and kissed her. "I want you to be my wife." And then, there were the happiest months of Brandon's life. Yes, they were only 5, but they were worth more than the rest of his life. But the day came, and in an instant, Roger and Aranda's happiness was shattered. "I told you you wouldn't marry her," Anthony shouted throughout the house. "Are you getting married to Vanessa in October?" "No," the son stood his ground. "I'm only marrying Aranda, and I don't care. You can take everything away from me." His father's cheekbones twitched nervously. He knew perfectly well that he could not intimidate Roger with this. "Well, you made me do it." His eyes were bloodshot. "Either you stay with her, or I'll destroy her." The boy turned pale. He felt inside that his father could do anything to her. "She's pregnant. We're having a baby." Roger threw out one last argument. "I don't care. Either you stay with her, or I'll take her out," Anthony replied coldly. "That's my last word. I won't tolerate her." The man left the house and headed for his office. Roger sat down on the bed and wept bitterly. The situation seemed hopeless. He couldn't take that risk. He couldn't marry Vanessa either. It would be a betrayal, and first of all to himself. The young man rushed to his desk, gathered all the documents he needed, threw a few things in his bag so as not to attract anyone's attention, and went out into the courtyard. "Edward, I urgently need to sell my car to someone," he said a couple hours later today. He and Aranda had opened a visa to Italy, but the girl had not been released from work at the last moment. Roger checked. He had exactly 2 days left. "I'll sort it out on the spot," he said to himself. The main thing was to make sure he didn't do anything to her. Roger stopped outside the restaurant, took a deep breath, and opened the door. He was immediately noticed by Aranda. "Aranda, I need to leave immediately," he whispered in her ear. "I will always love you. Take care of our child." Tears ran down his cheeks. "Roger, what's wrong?" The girl was worried. "Did your father do something to you?" "God willing, we'll meet again," he said quickly, and ran out of the restaurant with an arrow. "Roger," Aranda shouted after the car as it drove away. She kept dialing his number, but he was silent. That day, Aranda had been admitted to the hospital. She was under a lot of stress and was in danger of miscarrying. "I have to pull myself together," she ordered herself. "It's our baby, and I'm going to carry it." Roger got on the plane and dialed his father's number. He didn't answer for a long time, but picked up the phone the 3rd time. "Did you get what you wanted?" his son told him. "I'm leaving for good. You'll never see me again." "Where are you, you bastard?" Anthony said. "I'm so sick of you." Roger disconnected the phone. The takeoff was announced. He was well aware that he couldn't prove anything. Even if he took a statement to the police and provided evidence, his father would still win. He would be covered. He looked out the porthole. tears were streaming from his eyes. He didn't know what would happen to him then. He was going nowhere. "I love you," he whispered, and saw Aranda's face before his eyes. "And I will always love only you." More than 7 years had passed. There were already many people crowded in the hall. Someone announced that in 10 minutes the opening of the exhibition would take place. A young man of about 35 entered the hall. There was excitement on his face. To gain a reputation as a gifted artist in a country that is considered an unquestioned authority on art seemed incredible. "Roger, hello," a beautiful woman in high heels approached the man. "Well, are you ready?" The exhibition was dedicated to one woman. She was present in all the paintings, but the main character was never shown in all her glory. She was more like a ghost. Her body was transparent and thin, attracting attention wherever she was, in the garden, on the seashore, or lying on the sofa. There was only one portrait that spelled out all of Aranda's features. Her slightly wavy hair, dolly name and eyes made her close to the standard of Italian beauty. Roger walked over to her portrait and pondered. Then he was flying nowhere, hiding from the police because his visa had run out and he couldn't renew it. Very quickly, the money from the car he had sold ran out too. The young man painted portraits on the streets of the big city, lived wherever he could, until one day he was noticed by Tina Roger, then did not know who stood before him. That it is not only a connoisseur of art, but also an agent who deals with many famous painters and sculptors. The woman immediately liked his style. He was unusual. So after 8 months of wandering, the life of a Russian homeless artist took on a new meaning for him. Tina began to promote Roger, soon learned his sad story. The woman managed to sell a few of his paintings, and some people recognized the new artist. One day, Roger showed his manager the portraits of Aranda. The woman was absolutely delighted. "One day you will have an exhibition," she told him by name. "My word." The Italian was 47 years old at the time. She looked stunning. Roger often went to her house, got along well with Tina's husband, her youngest daughter. The older one had lived in America for a long time. "Everything will be all right," Tina approached Roger and smiled. "Do you deserve it?" The exhibition went splendidly. 7 paintings were bought in the first 3 days. The only piece that didn't sell was a close-up portrait of Aranda. It was Roger's most prized possession. The man had had no connection with Russia for a long time. He was sure that his beloved had married, that she already had children. He never wrote or called her. Roger was still afraid of his father. Anthony was insane. He could easily take revenge on him. The only way to protect Aranda was to cut off all contact with her. In all these years, he'd been living his dream. "Are you Roger?" A man's voice in Russian sounded behind Roger's back. The exhibition was coming to an end, and he was in the hall with Tina every day. "Yes," he said quietly. The man was unfamiliar to him. "And have we met before?" "I don't think so," he approached him. "I've been to Rostov, but you were no longer there." The pain of the past returned to Roger. He turned pale. The man thought that after 7 years his father had found him after all. "How long have you been in Russia?" The stranger asked him a question. "I guess I have. Otherwise you would know the latest news. What happened?" The shiver ran down his spine. He held his breath with excitement. "Your father," he hesitated. According to the official version, he died on his own, but he stopped talking. "Edgar 2 years ago bought one shop that belonged to your father. I'm on vacation with my family in Italy. I happened to see a sign that said Roger the Painter, and I was curious. Your father's gone." The man could barely speak. And how long ago? It seemed to him that his heart began to pound frantically. "About 2.5 years ago," Edgar answered. "The whole business went to his brother-in-law, your other sister's husband, but he couldn't handle the workload. I heard your father was a tough guy. He could keep everyone in line." "Edward's in charge now?" Roger either asked or confirmed. "Well, I live in Moscow. According to the latest news, he's close to bankruptcy," Edgar said. "As they say, he's out of control." The man talked to Roger some more, even bought one of his paintings. Roger was not himself. He informed Tina that he urgently needed to go to Russia. "Will you come back?" she sighed. "In any case, I'm glad I helped you acquire a name." The woman hugged the artist, crying. Roger himself did not know what would happen next in his life. Rostov echoed the trembling in Roger's whole body. He landed at a long-forgotten airport. The residential neighborhoods echoed in his blood. Memories pierced his heart with arrows. "I want to see her so badly," he whispered, then immediately dismissed the thought. Aranda must have been married, and it was not his place to interfere with someone else's family. From old acquaintances, Roger quickly learned what had happened. He was sitting at Thomas's house visiting. "The rumor was that your Edward had ordered it," his old friend sighed. You see, your father told us that you'd crashed in Italy. We all thought you were dead, so no one looked for you. Thomas, I don't understand. But if our son-in-law ordered it, why is he in such a poor state himself? Roger pondered. Well, I think a lot of people opened their mouths about your father's condition, and as long as he was in power, no one could do anything about it. But once Edward took over the company, he was quickly dealt with. Even your mother was shocked when the will was read, Thomas continued. All she was left with was a house and one bill for a comfortable old age. Where that paper came from, I don't know. As I remember now, your father disappeared. Naturally, all Rostov was on its ear, and they found him in some apartment. Died of a heart attack or had a blood clot broken off, something like that. No signs of violence, nothing. Found the landlord of the apartment, rented it out. He doesn't know anything. So they questioned him, but they couldn't find anything. They said he died of natural causes, and then pop. Edward became the new owner. He was clean too, according to the coroner. Anyway, it's a bit of a messy story, but it doesn't end well. After your mother died, Edward's business went downhill. So now he's working his ass off to keep his position. By the way, I hear he's having an anniversary party the other day. He's decided to gather the elite of society to showcase himself and enlist their help. He won't last long on his own. He's bankrupt. He needs people who are willing to invest their money in him. No matter how much Roger was against his father, he made the decision to show up at his son-in-law's anniversary. Why, he didn't know himself at the time. But the man used to trust his intuition. I don't want to go there. Aranda answered at once. I don't want their money, she said angrily. It seemed to the woman that she was already working out of her last strength this month. Finally, Aranda decided to quit the restaurant. She had stayed here too long already, although this job had given her the opportunity to survive two great tragedies in her life, the loss of Roger and her daughter. And so, in their penultimate week, they were called to Edward's office. Aranda knew it was Roger's son-in-law. It had been so many years, but she had never forgotten him. 3 months after she lost her daughter, word reached her that Roger had crashed to death in Italy. Aranda lived like that in her studio. There was still a portrait hanging above her bed. In fact, nothing had changed in her life in those 7.5 years. She never moved to her uncle's place by the sea. The only thing Brandon planned to do was to use the money she raised to open a small flower store. She wanted to do it in honor of her one and only man. Roger was forever in her heart and in her destiny. People were already gathered in the huge hall. Edward's birthday party was more like a wedding than an anniversary. Aranda was in no mood to do her work until a woman in her 50s appeared in the hall, holding the hand of a girl of about 7. Aranda flinched. The girl's wavy hair and her prominent eyes seemed familiar. The girl rushed first to Jubilee, then to his wife. Aranda watched her intently. Everything inside her thundered. The stranger's delicate purple dress contrasted very well with her tan skin, Aranda thought. She looked so much like me. Aranda looked at her hands. She had always been told that her skin tanned very easily and took on a beautiful hue. So I need to calm down, or I'm just going to go crazy, the woman's mind raced. The festivities were in full swing. Aranda tried not to look at the girl. She had mixed feelings about her. But every now and then she would take a glance at her with her eyes. Aranda was serving one guest. Dirty dishes needed to be picked up. She picked up the tray and walked toward the exit. When the tray fell out of the waitress's hands, she stopped, her hands trembling. Roger, Aranda said. He almost fainted when he saw her too. The woman began to pick up the broken dishes. The guest rushed to help her. Aranda, can we talk later? I need to take care of something first, Roger said, touching her arm. Edward's sister and her husband froze in shock as Roger approached them. The birthday boy glanced back and forth at him. Please, not here, Edward's sister whispered. I promise I'll tell you everything. Roger slowly disappeared from the restaurant. He tried to find Aranda, but she was in the back room, crying. She was afraid to come out to see him again. God, he's alive, she whispered. But why? Why didn't he tell me anything? Perhaps he had been married a long time and had children. So Roger did not linger in the restaurant. He thought he'd find Aranda after he'd settled things with Edward. No, he didn't want to sue him or settle with him. He just needed to know what had happened to his father and mother. The truth exactly, because that way he could let it go. He didn't care if Anthony was killed or not. What mattered was that he would never pose any threat to Aranda or to him ever again. It was almost 11 when a cab pulled up outside Edward's house. Roger paid, pressed the intercom. His sister lived in an expensive house. Although the anniversary had gone well and the man had managed to arrange a meeting with 2 influential people, neither he nor his wife were at ease. What will happen now? Naomi sobbed. Vadim, it will be easy to prove. We could go to jail for this. What's that got to do with us? He grumbled. Your father started all this, so let them ask him. Out. Let them go to the cemetery and question him. But stop it, the wife said, angry. Don't talk nonsense. We're not doing so well as it is. Naomi, what do you want from me? Edward replied angrily. Don't get on my nerves. The fact that your father made a will for me was a miracle. You and I didn't even know about it. He had a mind of his own. In fact, I found out by accident that Roger was alive. The bell rang, and they both shuddered. Naomi immediately began to sob. Her heart was telling her that it would all be over soon. Edward took a deep breath and went to open the door himself. Edward's brother-in-law appeared on the threshold. But come in, he smiled wryly. Roger, you're like a ghost, for God's sake. Where did you come from? Did you come from Italy? He answered calmly. Edward, I wanted to have a serious talk with you. Edward's sister came into the living room. She was crying. At first his brother thought it was because of him, but then he realized that something else was going on. Roger, Edward began, we really didn't know you were alive. Just a few days before Anthony died, I found out about you. Was he arguing with your mother? The guest was silent. He wanted the host to speak first, and then he began to ask them questions. It was really my father's idea. Naomi ran up to him and knelt in front of him. Please don't take her away from us. Sharon loves me as a mother and Edward as a father. Roger was completely confused by what he was hearing. He had no idea what he was talking about. Sharon, is this your daughter? He tried to piece together the facts. Well, you know I can't have children, Naomi sobbed. It was the father. He came over one day and said he'd made a deal with the doctor to make sure I was pregnant the whole time. I wore a false belly, especially since our blood runs in it. Our blood, her brother looked at her sideways. Naomi, what are you trying to say? What? What? Edward was angry that it wasn't our fault that your Anthony gave us your baby Aranda. Roger's legs gave out and he struggled to grab the couch. Naomi came to her senses, brought her brother some water. It was him she kept repeating. Roger, it wasn't our fault. We didn't want to, but he insisted. You know him. If he says it's right, it's right. We're used to Sharon. We love her like she's our daughter. There was some truth in what the woman said. Edward still didn't see Sharon as his daughter. Naomi had really put all her love into her. Roger was at a complete loss. Naomi and her husband had told him everything they knew. It turned out that his father had heard about Ariana's pregnancy from him, so you could say it was his own fault for blabbing. Anthony was so connected back then, he could have easily arranged the loss of Ariana's baby. What really happened to him? The guest stared intently into Edward's eyes. We don't know, Edward shrugged. I swear. He was found dead in some apartment somewhere. No one knows what he was doing there. Maybe he was meeting his mistress or negotiating. Anyway, nobody knows what happened there. And then there was this will. Naomi intervened. Roger, we didn't even know about it. Mother didn't tell us anything either. And she didn't even know about it. I think he was just trying to get back at me, Roger said. He knew I was alive. Perhaps he had heard rumors about me. They say you ordered it. I don't care what happened to him. I don't care what happened to him. No, I was never as great as he was. The man objected at once. Besides, I'm not happy about it myself. His sausage world began to crumble after he left. I've sold some of it, and the leftovers are giving me a lot of trouble, more trouble than profit. To tell you the truth, I'm getting tired. If things don't work out in the next few months, I'm going to sell the hell out. I can't take it anymore. He's absorbed so many people, Roger sighed. His factory was bound to collapse sooner or later. What are you going to do with your daughter? Brought Roger back to his sister's question. She was crying again. But first I'll talk to Aranda, and then we'll decide, he answered seriously. Naomi, she and I have suffered a lot, but Sharon must decide for herself. I'll give her a choice. We'll see what Aranda chooses. For the umpteenth time, Roger's life took a completely different turn. He went back to the inn, even though his parents' house had never been sold. He absolutely did not want to go there. God, what had I done to Aranda? A monster, Roger scolded, taking a mother's child away from her mother. I'm sure she doesn't know anything about anything. The man closed his eyes, and it was as if all her pain had been transmitted to him. He shuddered. So many times he'd pictured Brandon making her happy, but it was only in his dreams. In reality, she was suffering. I don't even know how to tell her about all this, he thought. if she has a husband and other children, and I don't know what to do if Sharon is used to her new parents and has never heard from us. The next day was very hard. Roger got up late. He didn't want to drag out his meeting with Aranda. Even if her husband came out to him, he agreed to talk to him. The cab stopped outside Roger's restaurant. They said Aranda was sick and wouldn't be coming into work today. Could you tell me where she lives? He asked. The receptionist gave him a suspicious look. This was a new person. She didn't recognize Roger. I'm an old acquaintance of hers, Roger said. To his surprise, he glanced at the walls. His paintings were still hanging on them. The man smiled. Yesterday he hadn't had time for them. Do you know their author? Pointed to one painting, the receptionist. The woman shook her head negatively. That's me, he said simply. He began to remember the past receptionist. All right. The woman approached him and whispered something in his ear. To Roger's surprise, Aranda's address hadn't changed. How had he not guessed it himself that he needed to start there? He stopped at a familiar house there, on the 5th floor. He had once lived with Aranda. But maybe they have one child, and they all fit in the studio, he thought. Roger reached out his hand several times, but then let it go. Finally, Roger made up his mind and pressed the apartment number. No one answered. He was in luck. A man came out of the entryway and he was able to enter. The man stood by the elevator and was afraid to press the button. Finally, the elevator stopped on the 5th floor and he headed for the right door. He rang the bell several times, but no one answered him. He didn't even hear any sound or noise. Suddenly, the elevator opened and Aranda stepped out of it. Both stood there unable to utter a word. I'm coming to see you. May I? Roger barely spoke. Frank, we need to talk. He looked pleadingly into her eyes. 5 minutes later, they were sitting on her couch, looking at each other. Roger rubbed his hands together nervously. He promised that if I didn't marry Vanessa, he would kill you. There were tears in his guest's eyes. Frank, I had no choice. He was watching me, and he was watching you too. If you and I had been in contact, he would have done something to you. Aranda was silent. Tears were running down her cheeks. It was very difficult for her to speak. I buried the two people closest to me. She got up from the couch and looked out the window. Roger, I lost our daughter. She was stillborn. The woman couldn't stand it and threw herself on his neck. I'm so sorry. 2 weeks before the birth, I got sick. I was picked up at a restaurant. Someone from work took my keys, brought my things. I had everything prepared, and then I felt sick. I couldn't come to my senses for a long time, and when I woke up, I was told that my daughter had died. Aranda, my love, our daughter is alive, Roger whispered. My father did it all. I think he wanted to punish me like this. What do you mean? She pulled out of his embrace. Roger, don't say it like that. I'll just go crazy. My father organized the whole thing. He bribed the doctor. Our daughter is alive. He gave her to my sister because Naomi is infertile, the guest said. Aranda felt dizzy and fainted. Roger splashed cold water on her and the woman woke up. Where is my daughter? Aranda sobbed. Take me to her. I want to see her. Roger pressed his beloved to calm her down, began to explain to her that the girl had lived in another family all her life, and to declare to her just like that, out of the blue, that they are her parents, they also cannot. You don't want to destroy her psyche. Roger stroked Aranda's hair. Let's take it one step at a time. Okay, he kissed her forehead. Aranda agreed and calmed down, cleaned herself up. The fact that her girl was alive made all the difference in her life. Even if she doesn't want to know me, I only wish her happiness. The woman could barely hold herself together. Roger, I don't want to ruin my child's destiny. If she loves her current parents and wants to stay with them, I will accept it. Roger called a cab and they drove to Naomi's house. Her brother had already warned her that they wanted to meet their daughter. The guests sat in the living room. After a while, Sharon was brought to them. She, scrutinizing the strangers, her mother introduced her uncle and aunt. She's my mother. The girl suddenly asked Aranda. Aranda turned pale. Yes, Naomi nodded her head. How do you know? She cried. I heard you talking to your daddy once, Ashley Ta. You told me I had real parents. I love you. Sharon ran up to her and hugged her. Naomi, we're sorry. Aranda couldn't stand it either and cried. The girl stroked her foster mother's head. I will always love you too, she promised. I'll have 2 moms now, Sharon smiled. The bell of the flower store rang. Visitors came in. The girl immediately rushed to Aranda. Mom, she hugged her. Daddy and I decided to come and see you. She took Roger's hand. Did you remember that we're going to visit Naomi's mom and Edward's dad today? Sharon asked. No, Aranda answered. Cautiously, she approached her. Aranda was having a hard time with her second pregnancy, but she wanted to work. So, did you come to pick up the painting? She turned to her husband. All liked it. Took not one, but two, he laughed. They said they would think about a third. I painted something for us today, too. Sharon held out her portrait. It was of a woman with blue hair. Wow, it's a masterpiece, Aranda stroked her daughter. Did you paint a daddy's easel? Sharon nodded contentedly. She loved the prospect of becoming a real artist like her daddy. As Tina had anticipated, Roger didn't return to Italy, but his former agent helped him anyway. She found Roger wealthy clients from time to time, and he was very grateful to her for that. Sharon loved her former parents, so Aranda and Roger decided to stay in Russia so that there would be no tragedies in her life. Anthony stopped paying due attention to his wife a long time ago. He looked more and more at other women and girls, allowing himself to sit with the men over beer. What can I say? The man was all like his grandfather and father, former immigrants from a distant village who lived in fishing and hunting. And even after moving to the city and marrying a city girl, Anthony did not give up his habits. This, of course, always infuriated Barbara. What can I do? She complained to her only friend and neighbor Sophie, an old teacher and Jewish woman, who it is unknown how she ended up in this city, and on what means she lived is unclear. But why do you think so? You are a smart, intelligent woman, a primary school teacher. And you say that. Don't I understand? It is you, Sophie, who have children and grandchildren who will stand up for you. On the other hand, who will stand up for me. Understand I'm an orphan, and thanks for that I was able to learn with my own head. And if Anthony chases me, then where should I go? To the old room? You're just afraid of difficulties. That's understandable, but then see for yourself. Anthony is a bore and an ignoramus. Ill-mannered, but on the other hand, they are all like that. Was it really possible that your late husband cheated? Barbara looked at her neighbor in surprise. I thought mine wasn't walking when I was carrying our first and second babies under my heart. I was walking. Just remember, Barbara, some walk wisely, while others, like yours, put it on display for everyone to see. Sophie, does everyone really know now that he has a mistress? The neighbor smiled sadly, looked at poor Barbara, and stroked her hand. Barbara, just come to terms with it, and think about how you can give birth to a baby. How long have you been together? A few years. But it just doesn't work out. Yes, I haven't tried anything. I went to see doctors and sorcerers, but everything doesn't work out. The doctor says that the problem may be in the husband himself. Well, how do you find out? You can't ask him this directly. Knowing your husband's tough temper, I dare to assume that such a conversation will end in good hassle. Well, on the other hand, how to check? You really can't give him a mistress. If she got pregnant, that means the reason is you. At least on the other hand, he may leave for her if his mistress carries a child from him. And men are so unpredictable. No, Anthony won't leave. His father won't let him. Are you sure about this, Barbara? The woman nodded her head affirmatively, wiping away accumulated tears with a handkerchief. She had confidence in her father-in-law. It was he who found Barbara for his son, introduced him, and forced him to marry when he found out that they were dating and even intended to live together. Then he threatened his son that, if he divorced Barbara, he would not see the inheritance of his own ears. And there was a considerable inheritance there, as the woman herself believed. Well, what if your mistress gets pregnant? What happens? He won't abandon his child, his dear one. He won't abandon him. He will pay child support. And then, if anything happens, he will arrange guardianship. He is such a... Especially if there is an heir, he will break anyone's head for him. And the mistress will not agree to blackmail. My hand is strong, and if anything happens, it can burn you. Yes, he's a tough guy. Okay, see for yourself, but by the way, I have a couple of friends here. They went to visit a knowledgeable grandmother. If anything, I ask her address. Thank you, Sophie, you will always listen to me and console me. Nothing, neighbor. What can you do? This is our lot. If you need anything, get back to me. The neighbor left, and Barbara sat for a long time at the kitchen table in the empty 3-room apartment that Anthony's parents gave them for their wedding. And I thought and thought and thought and thought and couldn't come up with anything worthwhile. She understood that her husband was walking, and there was strong evidence for this. What can I do? Is it true? Shouldn't we put flyagrics in his borscht so that he doesn't go for a walk? But the woman did not know how far her relationship with the beauty went, who came to their city to work as an agronomist and part-time accountant at a large woodworking enterprise. It was there that her husband worked as a mechanic, and she worked as a primary school teacher. How good you are today. Look what I brought you. And Anthony handed the woman a luxurious necklace made of natural pearls of dark blue, almost black color. Oh, Anthony, where did you get such beauty from? And what will your wife say to all this? What will she say? Nothing. I bought the same one for her too. So there's nothing to be offended by. But if you don't love her, then why are you still with her? The woman cunningly tried to find out what was going on in his house. My grandfather is on Barbara's side, and he said that if I divorced, I would be disinherited. And there, believe me, there is something to fight for. Come on, you're agile and young. Arms and legs, like everything else, are there. You can earn money on the spot. And with a laugh, she grabbed him by the place of origin. Jadwiga didn't want to miss out on Anthony. What if the wife finds out about us? The accountant gently wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his chin. Nothing will happen, he will cry, that's all. Anthony was sure that this would happen. Even if we come to your house together? Jadwiga specifically emphasized the word your home while observing the reaction. Yours. Jadwiga, what are you talking about? What are you trying to achieve? When we started dating, we discussed this point. Don't touch your wife, you and I live separately. And she waits for me at home and cooks soups for me. Well, at least invite me to dinner? Or didn't I even earn that? Anthony, with a dissatisfied look, threw her hands off his shoulders and pulled away. He was already starting to get tired of this conversation. Okay, that's it. I have to go. Lunch was almost over, and I still hadn't had lunch. At the mere mention of homemade soup, Anthony felt a queasy feeling in his stomach and an urgent growl in his stomach. His Barbara's soup was always rich and delicious. Even my mother had never cooked something so delicious. So that means you don't love me? Jadwiga wailed in her polish and turned theatrically to the window, covering her face with her hands. Don't cry. I'll be back soon. In the meantime, it's time to work. Anthony quickly left the accountant's office and met his father nose to nose on the threshold. Dad, what are you doing here? His surprise knew no bounds. Yes, I decided to check on you, son. Your mother went home with Barbara to visit you. And I'm here, and I see that you've found yourself a new mistress. The man nodded at the sign hanging on the door of the accountant's office, Jadwiga Volchek. He looked at his son reproachfully, trying not to give him a ringing slap in the face. After all, this is not how he and his mother raised him. Oh, not like that. Bruno, although he came from the outback and had considerable health and masculine strength, never cheated on his wife. Yes, in my youth I had no hobbies, but when I got married I completely swore off cheating. But the son apparently didn't follow suit. He doesn't want to settle down. What are you talking about, Dad? I found out about salaries and bonuses. Do you really think everything is the worst? Oh, there's no need to tell me fairy tales. You reek of women's perfume a kilometer away. He shook his finger at him. Bruno wanted to say that he would sign over all his property to Barbara, but he lost his tongue just in time. It was not worth it to set up a woman like this ahead of time. Otherwise, you never know what would hit his fool in the head. Dad, for Barbara, I'll rip out anyone's throat, and she's my wife before people and God. Okay, at least you understand this. Okay, let's go home. I asked the director for you. My mother and I have a conversation with you. Anthony nodded and obediently followed his father. And Jadwiga stood under the door and heard it all perfectly. No, she didn't eavesdrop. It was just that the men spoke so loudly, openly, that everything could be heard perfectly behind the flimsy door. What now? All I can do is enjoy his caresses. He will never leave her, and a stingy tear rolled down her pretty face. Yes, what can I say? The woman was simply catastrophically unlucky. She didn't find a husband in her homeland, couldn't start a relationship, and there were only potential candidates for lovers. And so that someone would take them and ask them to marry. They simply weren't there. All the men passed by. Sometimes they stayed in her life longer, sometimes just for the night. Others spoke about her beauty, others about a woman's intelligence. Well, what does it matter to her? No family, no child, nothing. Jadwiga increasingly began to think about not just marrying Anthony, but having a baby with him. She knew from her lover that they had no children, but this family apparently had amassed enormous wealth. And maybe it's true. Follow your grandmother's advice and give birth to a boy or girl. Let it be a joy. Grandma, but how can I give birth? I've already tried and can't get pregnant. Maybe you can tell me what. And your boyfriend, does he have children? Or maybe infertile? This is important, granddaughter. Yes, it seems like he and his wife have no children. But on the side he said that there was a boy and a girl. And she might be lying. He's not lying, said the grandmother, laying out the cards on the table and looking at Anthony's fate. You know, my girl, I'll tell you one thing, that you shouldn't be together. But if you are thinking of giving birth to him, give birth. The baby will be nice, and his destiny will be wonderful. Granny, are you sure about this? Jadwiga looked carefully at the old woman who was smoking a pipe and looked at her granddaughter with a smile. Don't doubt it, I definitely see it. And my cards don't lie. The heredity there is good, and his relatives are rich. If they like their grandson, consider that a well-fed life is guaranteed for you. Jadwiga thought for a minute and began to finger her ancient rosary, mentally calculating each option. But then the grandmother took her word. Don't doubt it, you'll get more than you do now. The main thing is to conceive this child on your Anthony's marital bed in his home. Grandma, well, this is already. Don't think about it, do as I say, and everything will be good for you. Now go, I need to rest. Come tomorrow, I'll give you the collection. Just add it to your little man's food, and that's it. Consider it done. Oh God, thought Jadwiga, sitting behind the wheel of her car and heading towards the city. And why did she manage to go to her grandmother in the village for advice? Well, what can she advise? Herbs, rituals. Yes, in our age of technology and numbers, even though the very thought of the family's wealth haunted her. Maybe it's really worth thinking about the grandmother's words and not giving up on her plan? The woman turned the key in the ignition and pressed the gas pedal. The car let out a loud animal roar and took off, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Barbara had been studying with her students since the very morning. The woman was happy when she gave all of herself to the children, and they pleased her not only with good grades, but also with their attention and love. But even today, Barbara more and more often returned her thoughts to yesterday's event, the arrival of Anthony's parents. They arrived and brought a bunch of gifts and local delicacies, but it was Anthony's mother who started the conversation with her, which alarmed and impressed this woman. Yes, it's understandable, old people always wanted grandchildren, but she and her husband lived for so long and nothing comes of it. This frightened her at first, then made her despondent, but now Barbara has simply resigned herself to it. They gave me an address here, and I strongly advise you to go to it. The woman handed her a piece of paper on which the address of one village was written in beautiful handwriting. Wow. Judging by the name, it is somewhere on the border with Romania or Poland. Barbara.
Yes. Did you understand everything correctly? This is the address of a healer. And by the way, she helped many of my friends. Because Barbara, my advice to you, if you want kids, go to her. If not, then I'm sorry. I tried to do the best, otherwise, God forbid, he will find a woman on the side and make her a child. And what's next?
Barbara was sitting on a chair, crumpling a napkin in her hand and nervously biting her lips. She understood perfectly well how right her mother-in-law was, and if no measures are taken, the husband may simply leave. But you are an educated woman. How can you believe in all these superstitions? These superstitions, as you say, my dear, have helped me more than once to return my husband to the family, to give birth to a son, and to do many other things with the help of the most ordinary herbs and words. Don't underestimate this power. And what do you have to lose? Nothing at all, Barbara thought to herself, wiped away her tears and looked carefully at the piece of paper. And I'll tell Anthony that you'll come to rest with me. So don't worry about my son. Barbara mentally nodded her head and agreed. In the evening, lying in bed, she returned to this conversation over and over again. Anthony did not come home, and since his parents arrived, he spends the night in the garage. To all the questions why, he answered sharply that he did not intend to listen to his parents' moral teachings, so he would simply live in the garage. It's good that at least I come home for dinner. and you cook your own signature soup. Barbara smiled and nodded her head to her husband, because she knew perfectly well that he simply adores her signature dish and cannot live without it. He even once jokingly said that if they separated, he would definitely come to her for dinner. "Anthony, what makes you think that I will have a new husband? Do I need you and only you?" Yes, that's me, by the way. This was at the very beginning of their relationship. But now the issue with the children has become so urgent that even her signature dish is not able to save the rapidly sinking marriage. Okay, maybe it's good, but the face is not at home. It will be possible to pay attention to his parents and calmly think about the words of his mother-in-law, in whose person she found an assistant. Yeah, what if he really took a mistress? And the garage is just a go-ahead. Barbara turned over on her side and then simply got out of bed and began to walk around the room. She was truly tormented by doubts, but what could she do? She was distracted from her sad thoughts by a quiet knock on the door. "Barbara, aren't you sleeping?" The mother-in-law's voice was quiet so as not to wake up her already sleeping husband. "No, Mary, come in. I heard you spinning around from the next room. And now you are pacing the room. Are you still thinking about my words or whether Anthony has found someone else?" "Both. It's all somehow intertwined into a ball. And to be honest, I can't figure it out. Everything is going so smoothly with you and your husband." "Hey, no, honey, now we've gotten used to each other. And in his youth, my Nicholas was very wayward and violent. Do you know what guys from the outback are like in this regard? Jealous and free at the same time. Do not, you know. Maybe even good. Anthony is ours, one might say almost urban. Not too rowdy. But according to your Nicholas, you wouldn't say that he is so violent. Oh, take my word for it. If you looked at the wrong person, you'll get a slap in the face. The dress was shorter than it was supposed to be. It could have been pulled by the hair. Not to mention wearing makeup to work, especially to the store. It even got to the point that one day he cut my hair. Imagine. Are you kidding? Barbara listened and couldn't believe it all. It was so. A friend invited me to her wedding, and Nicholas was in town then. Imagine someone told him that your wife not only came to the wedding in a new dress, but also braided her hair with ribbons. So he flew in like crazy, grabbed a sickle and cut off my braid with ribbons right at the back of my head. I then roared over my braid, and it was a noble one, as thick as my arm. I raised her from a very young age. I hope Anthony won't be like that. Don't worry about it. By the way, my grandmother also helped people, which is why she helped pacify my Nicholas's temper and give birth to Anthony. Don't look. I didn't immediately carry a little one under my heart, probably in the 5th year of marriage. And now I want to help you too. But why? Why do you need this? Then, for my Anthony, I want the best wife and daughter-in-law. And that's who you are. After all, you never know what kind of bitch would covet her husband as much as our wealth. Believe me, I've seen more than one of these. But this is so lyrics and romances. Now, don't think. Better put on your robe and let's go to the kitchen to drink tea. I brought one wonderful collection. It will help improve your sleep and calm your nerves. 2 women were sitting in the kitchen by candlelight and drinking tea. They chatted like old friends. And who would have thought that mother-in-law and daughter-in-law could get along so well? Nobody. The next day, early in the morning, Mary dialed her son and, in the tone of a gallant commander, clearly said, "Anthony, are you coming home for breakfast?" Apparently, the son said that he had already had breakfast. That's why she immediately posed the next question. "By the way, I need Barbara. And I'm temporarily taking her from your family nest. I hope not for long. Don't worry, son, you won't be left an orphan without food. I want to send the girl to a resort for a couple of days to relax." Well, with your commanding tone, how can anyone argue with you? Take it. And let Barbara rest as much as she wants. That's what we decided on. Well, Barbara, now you are free like a bird for a few days, or even a week. By the way, if necessary, I will help you apply for sick leave at work. Yes, in principle, it's not worth it. We have summer and holidays. True, first graders sometimes attend after-school classes, but due to the accumulated weekends and days off, I can find time during the week. But what will I tell her? I have never communicated with such people. Nothing. You just come to her. and then she will do everything herself. There are rumors about her that the old woman sees everything. Barbara took a sip of aromatic tea and looked carefully at her mother-in-law, trying to understand and accept everything she was saying. Don't worry, you'll find her right away. Within a few days, Barbara packed a small bag and called a taxi that took her to the station. Standing on the platform, she kept thinking, is she doing the right thing? Yes, maybe it's true Mary. It's better to do it and regret it than not to do it, and rack your brains over the missed chance. Yes, don't doubt it, you're doing everything right. The young voice of a handsome boy sounded right next to her ear, and Barbara jerked in surprise. Sorry if I scared you. Do you need help with things? Yes, I would be grateful. Are you in this carriage? Yes, 13th place. Wow, a damn dozen. But you are coming with us, dear lady, and our cheerful company will entertain you all the way, if you don't mind. Yes, of course, I don't mind. Give me your bag. And the guy helped her bring her things to her place and sat her down when the cheerful company of young guys began to take their places. Barbara looked carefully at the cheerful guys who were apparently going on a camping trip. You are probably going on a hike? Barbara carefully inserted her word into the conversation of the young people. Well, how can I say a hike? We fifth-year students are studying the culture of one fascinating region on the border of 3 cultures. And so we go to the village. We will collect local stories, ethnic groups, songs, as they say, the culture of the local indigenous population, and the 3 nationalities living in this region. Or rather, within the framework of one very interesting village for us. How amazing. This means that God himself sent you to me. I am also going to this village. At that moment, the conductor looked into their compartment and sweetly asked if they needed a bed and whether they should serve tea. Yes, dear girl, said Barbara. Serve it. In the meantime, in return, I treated you to a pie from my grandmother. Oh, thank you. This will be for dinner. And by the way, as you understand it, you are traveling in compartments for everyone? We arrive in the morning, almost before dawn. Don't worry, I'll wake you up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll bring bed linen and tea later. The conductor left, and the company continued to settle down in its places. Yes, God sent me these young people. It will be fun to ride. And if anything happens, they will show you what and where on the spot. But how to start an interrupted conversation, Barbara thought. But then the young man himself took the conversation in the right direction. What is your name? Here I am, Oleg. And you, as I understand it, are going with us to the same village. I am Barbara, as the Georgian queen, and apparently I am going with you. Affairs? Yes, there is one thing. I think you will also find it interesting. Wow. We are directly pursued by success all the way to this region, Oleg said confidently, and he sat down more comfortably, preparing to listen. Apparently you have something to tell us. Yes, they told me that there is in this village, somewhere even on its outskirts, an old woman who seems to be a healer, herbalist, and witch all rolled into one. Young people, I just ask you not to laugh, but I need to get to her. Wow. It's as if God himself sent you to us. Can we go to her with you? It's true, we are interested in everything. But if you don't mind. Yes, I don't mind. On the contrary, the support of young people is important to me. I really hope you won't laugh at me. That like this. An older woman believes in all this nonsense. No, we won't laugh, the girl said and extended her hand in greeting. My name is Helga. Can you tell me what problem you are coming to her with, if it's not a secret? Barbara closed her eyes for a minute and wondered whether it was worth exposing her own grief and problems to people's rumors. But at that second it burst through her. What can I say? After all, each of us has had moments when we want to talk about everything to a stranger, to shift our problems at least for a minute. Yes, you understand, young people. Maybe I'm wrong myself. Maybe it just happened this way, but my husband and I haven't been able to have a child for a year now. They seem to be healthy, they underwent examinations, but nature does not give us a chance to become parents. Maybe the problem is me. After all, my husband has a child on his side. But that's what they say, and I'm barren. My mother-in-law treats me as if she were her own daughter, but not at all. I'm afraid that my husband will leave for someone else, and she will give birth to a child, and I will remain out of work. Yes, and I intuitively feel that he has a mistress. I don't know how serious it is. The company of young people listened and remained silent, because everyone understood her grief and sadness, and then Alex tried to somehow cheer everyone up. And here you will check how much the old woman is a master of her craft. But by the way, our curator, historian Pablo, spoke about an old woman living in this village. Maybe this is her. This will be great. Sure, the topic of my fortune-telling. And he cheerfully raised his hand, and his idea was immediately picked up by the girl Helga. Then the topic of ancient rituals for pregnancy is mine. This, by the way, is very interesting, and as far as I know, no one has written it yet. So my work will be unique and inimitable. There is nothing unique. After all, this is all well-forgotten old stuff, said a guy with a thin beard that made him look like a deacon from the local parish from the top shelf. Barbara listened to them and smiled. After all, how good it was to travel in the company of such young people, ready to help and support in the most unusual decision. It was fun to ride. Evening imperceptibly turned to night, and the company, slowly settling into place, began to prepare for bed. The only one who could not sleep was Barbara, who was lying and looking at the shelf. I thought about the old woman, about her relationship with her husband, and about what would happen next. And Anthony at these moments was hugging the other one with all his might, giving her caresses and kisses. The woman carefully pulled her lover away from her and looked into his eyes. Maybe we shouldn't rush and act like this thoughtlessly. Your parents are probably at home, and I'm not interested in tumbling on my marital bed. Jadwiga, but understand, my wife and I haven't slept together for a month. Yes, and I like you very much. He tried to kiss her, but she pulled away, and breaking away from his embrace, sat down at her desk. I don't think this is a good idea. Yes, and I need to work. Work. How to bring you gifts, you always had time. The same skins for your new mink coat, ring and all. How now? I'm free, you need to work. Amazing. Jadwiga realized that she had gone a little too far, immediately jumped up and walked up to Anthony, gently hugging his waist. She kissed him lightly on the chin, but didn't get angry. You see, I need to get used to the idea that you and I will be doing this in the place where you slept with your wife. Just give me time. Okay, I'll go. I still need to eat and work. But tomorrow I think you and I will come to visit me. He winked at her and left the office, quietly closing the door. Anthony walked down the corridor and whistled a light melody, and Jadwiga put her head on her hands folded on the table and sobbed silently. But the truth is, how could she stoop to just running after a married man like that, being led by him? But in her youth she was the first beauty for whom the most enviable gentleman remained. Now what? There is simply no trace left of the past. How to be? Maybe we should just pack our things and move to another city and get a new job. Although on the other hand, what will change from this? Well, even if she finds a new job there, what will that do for her? Absolutely nothing. After all, Anthony's place will be taken by another, the same. She wiped away her tears and opened the window, taking a few deep breaths. We need to calm down, otherwise the director will come in and she'll be sitting there, crying and ugly. What will she say about her eyes then? As for Anthony, it's worth going to visit him and doing as her grandmother told her. Then you can think about the future. But Jadwiga did not even suspect that the fast train from the outback was taking Barbara to her own grandmother. Well, Barbara, our station Oleg said when all 5 of them went out onto the platform early in the morning, when the sun had not yet risen, and the early fog covered the grass with a shroud. Now let's get your suitcase and think about what we should do. Come on, Oleg, I'll carry him myself, he's light. By the way, look, there is a horse harnessed to a cart. Maybe they will give us a ride to the village. Indeed, nearby stood a horse harnessed to a cart, where a man of unknown age was dozing. He always came to the station with his mare, because he knew very well that only this train would make a stop near their village. And many of the sufferers are looking for their famous grandmother Elsa, as everyone called her. And at her age, she could still give odds to many young people. What kind of braid? As thick as your hand and up to your waist. One day he saw Elsa swimming late at night on their lake. Where even strong men don't go, they said that this lake has no bottom. Who wants to check whether this is true or not? And she splashed in the water, on which the shimmer of moonlight glittered. How can you not believe that she is a witch? Especially when this old woman comes out of the water, and her wet hair, like a veil down her back, drags along her waist. Bruno. He shook the reins, and his filly set off, heading as usual towards the people. Young good. By any chance did you come to visit our Elsa? Yes to her. And you probably wait for such petitioners and sufferers every time. No, my grandmother told me about you. And he burst into a very unpleasant laugh, which gave many goosebumps. But seriously, I'm here every morning, because they go to see our grandmother a lot, so that's how I earn extra money. Get into the cart, I'll take you in. If necessary, you can stay in my hut. I live alone, and the house is big. Thank you, Alex said and looked at his companions. You were sent to us by higher powers. But I don't know what higher powers are. But since we came, it was certainly out of great need. Come on, sit down. There's no need for you to be cold. We'll come to me, give you some tea, and then to our grandmother's. But she doesn't accept morning prayers before the end. And she lives in the village. And how far is it from you? Alex couldn't calm down and kept asking the man, and he answered very willingly. Well, how is it in the village? Rather, behind the village, go a couple of kilometers further inland to the forest lake. She lives on the edge of the forest and collects herbs there. Does she have any relatives? Barbara inserted her word, trying to keep up with the young people and not be branded a prude. Yes, I had a daughter, but she died of a cold. An only granddaughter, Jadwiga, remained, but she lives in the city and rarely visits her grandmother. The girl became arrogant that Elsa would give her her gift. But I think that's where it all ends. Jadwiga has no talent, or doesn't, or simply doesn't want to. And then let them decide among themselves. The places here were truly beautiful, such a nature untouched by man and technology. Apparently her mother-in-law was right. These are places of power, but soon they stopped in front of a fairly large house, where their driver directed his horse and jumped off the cart as usual. He extended his hand to Barbara and said, "Let me help you. My name is Bruno. What about you?" The man's eyes were so blue that such a color simply does not exist in nature. Barbara, the woman said, spellbound, and extended her hand. Bruno's palm turned out to be tender and strong at the same time, and with a slight movement the man helped her get off the cart, took her suitcase, and led her into his house. More precisely, it was not a simple village house, but a solid wood frame, which not everyone could afford. And as the woman noted, almost all the houses in the village were made of logs. Yes, we have a fairly prosperous village, and all thanks to Elsa. The man's words sounded like an answer to Barbara's silent question. It's because of her that a lot of people come to us, and where there is demand, there will always be supply. It's right. And the nature in your village is beautiful. Well, go into the house and serve tea, as promised. You can have tea, or something stronger. And if necessary, a bathhouse can be organized. The man said in a quiet voice, smiled slyly, and looked at the woman with bright blue eyes. This look, voice and touch made Barbara feel either sweaty or cold. She had never experienced anything like this with Anthony, who was the only man in her life. Lord, how embarrassing, the woman thought. To come to such a wilderness for help in order to save the family, and look at yourself. Barbara, look. Oleg's voice distracted her from such thoughts, and she looked in the direction where the guy was pointing. The sun was rising over the horizon. Barbara was truly delighted with what she saw, because she had almost never seen a sunrise like this, and what she saw amazed her. Bruno, it's so beautiful here that you can't even imagine. Probably for me. A villager cannot understand all this beauty. But I ask you to come into the house. Barbara entered the house and looked around. Is this really how people live in villages? Everything in the house was done with taste and skill. TV and refrigerator, microwave, massive table, and beautiful carved chairs. In general, this could be called a merchant's house, but not a cab driver's house. Yes, she should live here. Apparently, Bruno saw it all on her face and said directly, "If you want, you can stay here as long as you want." Bruno, thank you, of course, but you practically don't know me, and you never know what trouble I came here with. Yes, what a disaster. The man has your woman, but you cannot conceive a child. Do not argue. I see a lot too. But you, Barbara, decide your fate. The man shook his curly head and did not continue what he wanted to say. Bruno understood that silence is often golden. And Barbara smiled and thought for a minute maybe she really should leave her Anthony and start living here with this local handsome guy in this distant village and give birth to a bunch of little kids. God, how she wanted this to simply forget her past and come here. Bruno, thank you, but their conversation was interrupted by young people who had just managed to put things in the rooms allocated to them and went out into the hall. Alex looked carefully at Bruno and Barbara and immediately understood everything, but did not show it. Bruno, what about your famous tea? They say that you brew it with special herbs. This is what it is. But sit down. I'll put on the kettle and treat you to more honey than you've ever tasted in your life. When will it be possible to see Grandma? Don't worry, we won't miss it. In our village there is a small church, and then the church bell rang, which means the service is over. Then we can get ready. The woman nodded her head and sat down on a bench that stood under the icons, while Bruno and the young people set the table. After half an hour, such an aroma wafted through the room that you could lose your head from this sweet variety, and the smell of pies and honey made your stomach growl. Wow, what smells! What a treat for the eyes and belly, Helga said and reached for the pie. I'm so hungry that I'm ready to eat everything. Eat up, girl. You, as a future mother, will still need strength, Bruno said and looked at her carefully. Helga almost choked from these words, but casting a sideways glance at Bruno, did not say anything to him. Maybe this Bruno really knows that he won't even have to go to his grandmother. Barbara thought mentally. Good afternoon. Barbara crossed the threshold of a small house standing on the edge of the forest. Come on in. Don't stand in the doorway of my house. I'm glad to have guests. A stately and beautiful older woman, with a long braid, she looks like the heroine of old paintings, but certainly not like an old woman who brews another batch of potion and dries bats. As I understand it, you are coming to me about your husband. Yes, my name is Barbara, and my husband is Anthony. And I also came about the children. There is no way we can give birth to them. Yes, and you will not give birth to them from your own. He walks, and as long as she keeps him under her thumb, you will not live. Yes, and without her you would have separated. It's just a matter of time. Barbara was simply stunned by what she heard and almost fainted, leaning on the door frame. To avoid falling, she grabbed the door handle and closed her eyes for a second. Yes, I see that you didn't know about it, although you internally suspected it. So quickly sit down at the table. Here, have a drink. Barbara sat down on a bench and took a wooden mug with a drink from the witch's hands, drank it in one gulp, and, looking at it, said quietly, What am I supposed to do? What should I do? Waiting for a new husband. Although no, your destiny has already found you. Just wait a little and everything will be fine for you. And your own home, and children, and a good husband. Are you sure about that? Barbara still hoped that this was some kind of prank, and she would now get up, go home, and everything would be fine with them. Wait, and your destiny will come. I wonder who is my betrothed. Barbara looked at the woman ironically, not knowing how to react to the words, believe them or take them as a joke. You don't believe me, but I'll tell you one thing: he will have blue eyes. Dark-haired. Yes, you yourself will recognize him among many. Such a prince on a white horse. And Elsa burst into cheerful laughter. Then she sat down next to Barbara and looked carefully into her eyes. Taking her hand in hers, the healer began to stroke it and whisper something in an incomprehensible language. The woman sat spellbound and looked at her carefully, not knowing how to react, and then she simply began to feel inclined to sleep, and my head involuntarily dropped into my hands. Sleep, my girl, sleep. You didn't come here from a good life, from your orphanhood, but I will take away all your troubles, and may you dream about your real destiny. And Elsa carefully laid her down on the bench, put a pillow under her head, and went out into the yard where a group of young people were sitting. She glanced at the eldest among them and waved her hand, beckoning him to her. I see you are the eldest here. So listen, Barbara is sleeping now. Don't worry, everything will be fine with her. What do you understand, students? Yes, we have folklore expeditions, and if possible, then maybe you can tell us local legends, songs, or signs. Yes, young people these days are not too interested in magic, and even my granddaughter over there refused the gift, and I was so hoping to pass on my knowledge to her. And what will happen to your gift now? Helga looked carefully at this still strong woman and bit her lip, afraid to ask too much. What will happen, my dear? and she looked at another as her successor. Is that allowed? I take it this is a man? You understand everything correctly, man. And although in our family it is customary to pass the gift from grandmother to granddaughter, but if God is not worthy of a girl or something else, the gift should be passed on to a man. Interesting. What if he had no talent for your knowledge? My dear guests, understand that each of us has magic, and sometimes it hides so deeply that it is simply difficult to awaken it. But it exists, believe me, believe me. They sat and talked about everything and nothing, and Barbara was sleeping, and most surprisingly, she dreamed of the same Bruno who brought them from the station. But in this dream, it was no longer a simple man in old jacket and sneakers, but a handsome middle-aged man looking at her intently. And next to him stood two beautiful blue-eyed children. Barbara shouted his name so loudly that everyone on the street heard her voice and jumped out and quickly rushed into the house. Barbara, are you okay? Helga was the first to run up to her and took her hand. Yes, it was probably a dream. And there was Bruno who brought us here, two children. He took them into the house. Our house. So I saw my betrothed, thought Elsa. Barbara herself did not understand why she was so angry at the words of this woman that her future husband would come to her in a dream. But she jumped up from the bench and quickly ran out into the street. The woman, not understanding what she was doing, quickly headed away from the Elsa house towards the village with the only desire to pick up her things and leave here for her usual little world. Barbara, wait, where are you going? Bruno's voice sounded so unexpectedly that the woman tripped out of the blue and fell to her knees with all her might, painfully breaking her knee. Bruno, who asked you to scare you like that? Now my knees are broken. Forgive me, for God's sake, let's go, I'll treat your wounds. I have a first aid kit at home. It's not far from here, a few houses away. Already at home, Bruno himself treated her wounds and carefully looked at her face. What did our seer tell you? Judging by the expression on your face, you didn't like it at all. Imagine I didn't like it. I went for advice, but the outcome was completely different. Well, this happens in our world. Elsa said that there would be another, and this one was different. You, Bruno, came to me in a dream with two small children. Now Bruno himself was taken aback by what he heard and almost dropped from his hands the can of milk that he had brought from his neighbor. Is this really her, his destiny, which he has been waiting for so long, and which Elsa herself spoke about? This is the turn of events. He put the jar on the table, took out a cup and poured milk into it. He handed it to the woman. Drink this milk. Don't want. They've already given me something to drink in the morning. And after that it turned out that you are my destiny. What will happen after this milk? And she nodded towards the table with her head. Nothing will happen, because the milk is fresh. But whatever you want, I'll drink. Having poured himself some milk, Bruno drank the cup in one gulp and, putting it on the table, sat down on the bench. It turned out strange. But if this is true, then this woman is his future wife, and he will have the children he so wanted. Barbara, what if you really are my destiny? And in your dream, did you really see our children? Bruno, do you understand how unrealistic and stupid this all is? We have only known each other for a couple of hours. We are seeing each other, one might say, for the first time. And you are talking about a family that may not exist. After all, I am married and I have a husband. Barbara, I'm sorry if I allowed myself more than I should, but I believe and I really, really want to have a family, children. And you are such a beautiful woman, I don't dare detain you any longer. At least you can always count on my hospitality. Thank you, Bruno, I understand you, but it all seems so unreal and mystical to me. How? It's like a fairy tale. Bruno looked at the woman with a smile and noted that she smiled back at him. And thank you for your hospitality. If you accept, I will come to visit you again. Clean, so relax. Come. I will always be glad to see you. That's what they decided on. And in the evening, Bruno was taking the whole company back to the station, where the fast train heading to the capital was supposed to stop for. 3 minutes. Bruno helped load things into Barbara's carriage and, looking at her, said quietly, "If you need my help, come. I will not betray you, and I have enough money I can provide for you." Bruno, thank you. I'll think about your proposal and, if necessary, I'll come. She stood at the window and waved her hand to him, and Bruno stood on the platform, and his heart sank with melancholy and sadness. That's how his love left, and he couldn't do anything. All we could do was wait and hope that the witch was right and Barbara would return. Barbara drove home, thinking about what the local healer told her. "Barbara, did you get answers to your questions?" Alex looked at the woman carefully. "Don't even know. I had more questions than answers. What should we do with them?" She shrugged and turned out the window. I began to look at the trees, stations, and houses flying past without finding an answer. Barbara thought and thought and thought and thought, and time passed inexorably, giving no hope for a better outcome. "Anthony, hello. Here I am." Barbara tried to put a smile on her face, because according to legend, she returned from vacation and should have been fresh and rested. But the answer was silence in the apartment. Strange. At the station, she called Anthony and said she was on her way. To which the husband snapped, "Come, I'm home." Yes, Anthony was at home, but not alone, but with Jadwiga. The woman finally came to his home and spent the night on her lover's marital bed. Tea. "Now, Anthony, I'll probably go. Now your wife will arrive. I don't want her to see me. Now I will decide in this house. I'm tired of you and I constantly hiding, and I think we should talk frankly with my wife and amicably decide what and how." "Are you sure?" The mistress looked at him carefully and stroked his hair. "Yes, I am sure. In the meantime, my wife is traveling." The couple was so carried away by each other that they simply did not hear the door open and Barbara enter the apartment. She called her husband, and without receiving an answer, followed the noise into her own bedroom. What opened before her eyes instantly threw the woman into shock, and she simply did not know what to say, what to do. Barbara stood and looked at all this obscenity and simply remained silent. But Jadwiga noticed her first and screamed. The woman pulled the blanket over herself, covering her naked body. "Anthony, stop." She pushed him and pointed at the doorway with her eyes. "Barbara, weren't you taught to knock?" There was anger and indignation in his voice. After all, his own wife dared to stop him at a very interesting place to knock. "Anthony, are you serious? You brought your mistress into our bedroom, and I have to knock on the door of my own apartment." "Yes. In the meantime, please, my dear wife, prepare some food for us while we rest." From such words, Barbara was not only speechless, she fell into a kind of stupor. Stupor shackled her thoughts and will, and leaving her suitcase in the corridor, she obediently went to the kitchen. A mountain of unwashed dishes, leftover potatoes on the stove, dried soup, all this was waiting for her there. Anthony's voice sounded impudent, arrogant, and mocking. "Imagine, my dear husband, I cooked soup." And she threw a pan of boiling water onto the bed, almost hitting Anthony and his mistress. "What is your crazy wife doing?" Jadwiga screamed and jumped out of bed naked, grabbed her clothes and began to dress feverishly. She should be sued. Look, I have a burn on my legs. Better yet, take her to a mental institution." Madhouse? Barbara could not believe her ears and the fact that her husband did not react in any way to his mistress's words. "I'll call the police now and they'll take you away from here." "Barbara, calm down and don't shout. We need to talk about how adults can decide, so to speak, everything amicably." "Amicably, my dear husband. They decide to dress and not jump out of bed. You don't have to worry. I don't need your excuses, explanations, and everything else." She threw the empty pan on the bed and went to her room. She began to collect things in her bag, throwing them away without folding them. Barbara grabbed documents, money, and the few jewelry that her husband had given her from the table, and throwing everything into a small backpack, ran out of the room. Barbara quickly headed towards the exit, but her path was blocked by Anthony, who had managed to put on trousers for decency. "Barbara, where are you going? What are you doing? Don't you see?" Jadwiga said with a malicious smile. "She simply leaves you, and you should just file for divorce." "Jadwiga, I didn't give you my word here. Let him clean for you, cook, iron your shirts, get along with your mother and father. Or have you forgotten what your parents told you when you married me?" Anthony would never forget these words. When they first submitted an application to the registry office, the father threatened, "This is your first and last marriage. Take care of your family. If you get divorced, all your property will be transferred to your daughter-in-law. And it doesn't matter for what reason they would divorce, there will be no children, or the wife won't please. My mother and I will always be on my daughter-in-law's side. Moreover, Barbara Sirota, and to offend such people is a sin. It's a sin, Father, to live with someone you don't love. But I won't leave Barbara. But now he remembered that conversation, and he had no choice but to bite his lips and think about what to do. Jadwiga jumped out of bed at such words and, like a fish, gasped for air. She simply did not expect such a turn of events. It was not easy for her to accept the fact that her legal wife so easily accepted the very fact of betrayal, but also that this person has every chance of ending up on the street, and in the status of a beggar and homeless man. And who needs it? Anthony tried with all his might to restrain his anger and not raise his hand against his wife, so as not to kill her. Do you understand that it was a moment of weakness?
So minute that you had enough time to get from work and here. Anthony, don't try to tell me stories now. You have been with this woman for quite a long time, and thank God that everything turned out this way.
It happened. How is that?
Jadwiga could not forgive anyone for disgracing her like that, and not even allowing her to get a word in.
Jadwiga, you are a grown woman. You were simply used. You satisfied your own ego, and that's all. Or did you think that he would give up his wealth for you? Never. Has he ever given you a valuable gift? No, I didn't give it. Only a bouquet of lilies of the valley, and even then from our city flower bed. Jadwiga, of course, blatantly lied about everything, trying to downplay the importance of Anthony in her life, as well as the volume of financial investments in her. You see, did you want to cheat him out of money? Barbara stopped for a minute and mentally wondered if she had taken everything, if she had taken all the most valuable things. Barbara came out of the entrance and looked carefully. Yeah, there's Anthony's car. The neighbors on the bench had been gossiping since the very morning the kids had been scurrying around in the sandbox. The woman put her backpack on the bench and thought for a minute. Where should she go? No, as a last resort, you can, of course, call your mother-in-law and ask to stay with her for the first time. Barbara didn't even know how and what to do next, because Anthony knows where she lives, or rather she lived before, and where she works. For the sake of money, he will pester her with his visits, ask for forgiveness, and try to return her. But no, I won't let you interfere in my life. What if you return to the village, to that same Bruno, to his log house, and stay there forever? Barbara thought to herself and sat down on the bench for a minute. But then the front door slammed and Anthony ran out into the street, all disheveled and angry. Apparently the showdown with Jadwiga was serious. Look, her husband's face is so red. The anger makes my eyes flash like lightning. He looked for Barbara, and when he noticed her on the bench, he exhaled with relief and approached, trying to speak as calmly as possible. Barbara, I ask you, let's talk quietly and calmly. Let's talk like adults and reasonable people. How's that? Do reasonable people really just drag all sorts of indecent things onto the marital bed? Well, you see, she tempted me. But I love you. Don't drive me away. It seems to me that you are more worried about your parental capital than about me, or where I was on how to resolve the issue with children. What would you do if she got pregnant? Would you live with 2 families? But this is a utopia. Your parents would not accept this state of affairs. And where would you do something? Oh, Anthony, tell me, please. Don't know. Anthony really didn't know what he would do next. After all, he never planned his life so far ahead. And now I will still stay with you. No, Anthony, I just don't need you. Sorry, but I'm leaving you.
Okay, now I have a question. And where do you intend to go?
He stood and looked at her with an angry, twisted face, cherishing the last hope that his wife would ask to go home. Believe me, my dear hubby, this question should not worry you in any way. Yeah, that means you have someone to go to. And you will tell me that I am cheating on you. Were you really planning on leaving for someone else? I don't have any lover, and you shouldn't attribute your own sins to me, and I can go, for example, live with your mother for a while, and then think about who I should be with. She turned around and, picking up her bag, walked towards the roadway, where on the side of the road she simply raised her hand and began to catch the car. But the woman did not want to upset. Marry, and she will tell her all her adventures later. Now it's time to think and think about everything calmly. And where are we going, dear girl? The driver winked at her cheerfully and turned the ignition key in his old, but still working car with checkers on the door. "Come on," she waved, so to speak, without looking at the train station. The driver nodded his head in understanding and rushed off, trying to drive carefully and avoid getting into holes and potholes so that the passenger with sad eyes, God forbid, would not get seasick. They drove for quite a long time, about 15 minutes, or even 20. Although, needless to say, it was the peak of the lunch break, and it was also Friday. Many residents of the metropolis tried at these moments to leave the stuffy city, but she wanted to see Bruno again. "Sorry, did you say something?" The driver looked carefully at this strange passenger, who was muttering something absurd under her breath. "Did you tell me something?" "Oh no, sorry, I didn't say anything." Probably from an old habit. The taxi driver nodded understandingly and continued on his way. And Barbara continued to look out the window at the city landscapes flying by, and with every second her confidence grew more and more. Confidence that she should go to Bruno and come what may. And let me be considered a walker, but at least this is honest. And then I'll go to court. The taxi driver looked in the mirror at his passenger and did not say a word. You never know what kind of clients you come across. The main thing is that they get paid. And then it's no longer his business. Barbara paid the driver and, taking her bag, entered the old station building. She looked at the display of departing and arriving trains. Yeah, here's the direction she needs. "Girl, give me a ticket for the evening train number 157. "Yes, full." When the ticket was in her pocket, Barbara realized how hungry she was. Yeah, from one train to another. And I didn't even have time to change clothes, eat, or take a normal shower. That's why she wildly wanted to throw off her dusty clothes, stand under the stream of hot water and wash away all her sorrows and sorrows. But in the evening, Barbara sat comfortably in her compartment and, taking out a mirror, carefully looked at her reflection. It's good that I at least washed my face in the toilet, otherwise I would have walked around looking tired and exhausted. It's such a pity that she didn't take Bruno's phone. After all, even if he doesn't want to accept her, he'll simply send her home. So what should she do then? Yes, do nothing. I'll just go back to my room and continue working. Although why on earth would she return to her little room? She legally has the right to part of the apartment, which his parents gave her and Anthony for their wedding. Therefore, to hell with dogs. Out of principle, I won't let you live comfortably with your mistress. And it's true. And this Jadwiga wanted not only to grab her husband with a hook, but also her property. What if she can get pregnant? Barbara tossed and turned in bed all night with such thoughts, but could not sleep a wink. Just before dawn, she went out into the vestibule and began to look out the window. Forest, fields, power lines, all this flashed before her eyes, like her own life, gray and joyless. And I really wanted normal human relationships, warmth and comfort. "Girl, your station is next." The conductor handed her a ticket and smiled sweetly. So all my life on wheels. The carriage is her home, Barbara thought. But apparently everyone chooses their own destiny. It's nothing you can do. After 20 minutes, she was already standing on an empty platform far from her house and turning her head just like the first time. Everything around was shrouded in fog. It was so quiet that you could hear the dew dripping from the grass. Yes, neither Bruno nor his cart and mare were visible. Was she really so mistaken, and he simply didn't come? But he said that he's here every day. But as it turned out, he lied. Barbara stood and almost cried. But then in the distance she heard first quiet, and then more and more distinct clattering of hooves. And now the cart appeared. Has he really arrived? Didn't you lie? Barbara. Bruno immediately recognized her figure from afar and thought to himself with surprise that he had made a mistake. But no. What are you doing here? You just left. Bruno, is your proposal that you can stay in the village relevant? Barbara tried to squeeze out a smile, but it came out somehow crooked and askew. Yes, sure. I see you are alone here. There is no one else. Then get on the cart and let's go. The man helped her sit more comfortably on the cart and lightly spurred his mare. Now they were driving in silence, not saying a word. And what could we talk about? Bruno understood that Barbara had not come here again out of a good life and asked to stay with him. And the woman felt uncomfortable explaining something along the way. Barbara, can I ask a question? Why did I come here? You know, your healer was right. And my husband is not just walking around, but he also managed to bring his mistress into our house, put her on the bed, and asked me to make them some soup.
Yeah, thought Bruno, this woman has nothing good. Apparently, she really didn't come here out of good happiness, but that means Elsa was really right. This woman is his destiny. That's exactly what she said in the evening, when Barbara had already left. And he drank quietly alone in his own kitchen.
You're still standing there drunk, Bruno. Elsa's voice sounded right next to his ear, causing the man to tremble so much that he almost spilled the glass of tincture. Ugh, Elsa. You walk like a cat. At least cough at the threshold for decency. What if I'm with a woman? Yes, with what woman? Except with this little white one. And the healer nodded at the bottle of cloudy tincture that stood in the very center of the table. You shouldn't get drunk. Look, you'll still sleep through tomorrow morning. Well, tomorrow will be a normal morning, that's all. That's not all, said the old woman. I had a vision that Barbara would arrive tomorrow. So you should be at the station as usual. Understood me? I understand. I haven't drunk my brains out yet. But why would Barbara come back? She didn't believe a single word you said. Well, whether you believed it or not, it's none of your business. But she will most likely believe her own eyes when she comes home and sees her husband in bed with his mistress. Are you sure about this? And if she doesn't see it, then what? She didn't even look in my direction. And you say that she will come to me? Let's argue. If he comes, you will take me as godmother to your child. Yes, deal. If so, then I will carry you in my arms for this. He hugged the old woman, and she patted him on the back and spoke quietly. Better stop drinking and go to bed. Tomorrow will be a new day and a new life. True, from the very morning Bruno kept doubting whether he should go to the station or not. After all, the witch did not receive on Mondays and the people knew it. But now maybe it's not worth going. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, the man ran his hand over his stubble. No, I'll probably go. Now I'll go and shave and go now. All this flashed through his head in a matter of seconds. And Bruno, quietly nodding at the mare, glanced sideways at Barbara. She too was silent, mentally recalling how she found her husband in bed and that his mistress turned out to be a Polish woman. Bruno, do you believe Eliza? Do you believe what she says? Why not believe? Just recently I couldn't even imagine that you would come, but now you're here. He wanted to say that she herself asked to stay with him, but he bit his tongue just in time. And I myself asked to live with you. Is that what you wanted to say, Bruno? If you don't want me to live with you, then stop your horse. I'll go back. No, Barbara, you definitely won't leave here now. And if you are embarrassed by the fact that you will live with me as a guest, then I can tell you right away, marry me, and you will be a full-fledged mistress in my house. The woman looked sideways at Bruno and was just about to say something when her mobile phone rang. Looking at the screen, Barbara picked up the phone. Yes, Mary. Harry, Barbara, where are you? Bruno has been calling me since the morning. He says you're missing. No, you are neither at work nor in your room, in the dorm. And now I'm going for the second round to the village where the healer Elsa lives. For the second round. How can we understand what is actually happening? Were you there or not? Was. But I didn't really like what you told me the first time. Oh, how can I tell you, Mary Pavlovna, your son definitely has a mistress, and I want to divorce him. But where are you now? I'm going to the village, and I'm thinking of staying here for a while. Are you sure about this? My mother-in-law understood that nothing could be solved by shouting and swearing, so she tried to speak calmly. Yes, just don't get me wrong. It's hard for me to forgive betrayal. I need to think and make a decision with a calm mind. That's right, Barbara. But please call me. Do not get lost. Of course, I understand that my son is not perfect, but I would not want to lose a daughter-in-law like you. I heard you, and thank you for everything that you have done and are doing for me. Barbara hung up the phone and looked into the distance. The first rays of the morning sun illuminated the wheat field, and a light breeze made the ears look like a gentle sea. This is the truth, how fate can put everything in its place. The mother-in-law turned out to be closer to her husband and mother, and the stranger simply took him in and sheltered him in his house. Did she, mother-in-law, call?
Bruno looked at the woman carefully, trying not to show his excitement.
Yes, she said that Anthony was looking for me. She probably asked you to come back? Oddly enough, but no. After all, he understands I don't have the character to forgive betrayal like that. But you, Bruno, are still ready to host a married lady. Ready. But may I ask, how long will this sweet lady remain married? Not for long. Just believe me, we need to think about the situation a little now. And in a few days I'll just file for divorce. That's all. Bruno wanted to ask what about us, but he bit his tongue and turned his horse towards his house. He opened the gate and led the horse into the yard. Then he helped Barbara bring things into the house and, pointing to a cozy back room, said, "This is my daughter's room. You can stay here as long as you want." "Do you have a daughter?" Barbara looked at the man in surprise. "Yes, I had a woman when I was young, but it probably didn't work out. But I don't abandon my daughter, I help her. And if you want, I can introduce her." Bruno's words startled her. But the woman just smiled and answered, "Yes, we should probably get to know each other, but a little later. And to be honest, Bruno, I don't even know how to react to your proposal." "Which one exactly?" "To meet my daughter, or remain a full-fledged mistress in your house." "He will only be glad of this." Elsa's words behind them made both of them flinch. "You are back after all, Barbara. So I was right. Yes, and you were right. I wanted to come to you later, but I got ahead of you." "Nothing. I always say what I see, and it always comes true. Anyway, on the occasion of your arrival, I brought you a cake. I baked it myself. Knew you'd be back, Barbara." Barbara looked carefully at a real masterpiece of culinary skill with pigtails, curls with 2 doves on top. "Wow, just wedding. But we are not husband and wife yet. But you are a couple that fate brought together. And you shouldn't deny this. Bruno will make you feel good. But if in doubt, don't rush into a decision. Just wait and see, and your Anthony will show his true colors. And then you will finally make the right decision." Elsa turned around and went to the gate. And the man and woman stood at the porch of the house and, dumbfounded, looked after her. "Yes, Barbara, and if you want, then come to my place for tea tonight with Bruno." Barbara nodded her head silently and turned her gaze to Bruno, who also looked at her incomprehensibly. Anyway, which have not be avoided. By evening, Barbara had gotten a little comfortable in the house, laid out her simple belongings, and having prepared dinner, sat down on the veranda. "How do you like it, Barbara? In my house, if you need something, you always say, 'We won't buy it in our store.' This way you can go to the city. I have a car in my garage." "Do you have a car? What about the horse and cart? Why don't you drive a car? You see, this is a kind of production, an entourage or something, but nothing more. Believe me, Barbara, this is all the man gestured around the house and the farmstead with her predictions and help. You can be sure of this." "Yes, I'll try. But Bruno, tell me, what did Elsa mean when she said that my husband would show his face?"
But you can ask her this. It's time for us to get ready for a visit.
Here is the familiar little hut again. Grass is on the walls, sedge on the floor. Everything here breathed with a certain mystery, about which epics and fairy tales are written. It's so fairy tale-like here. Perhaps the only thing missing is a black cat.
But why is it not enough? I have one like this in my house. Apparently he just decided to go for a walk. Or, as always, he went out hunting for mice.
Wow. Elsa, can I ask a question? What did you mean when you said that my Anthony would show his true colors? But really, should I be afraid and afraid of physical harm from him? Or will Anthony, as always, limit himself to a verbal skirmish? Yes, you see, Barbara, your Anthony is not as simple as it might seem. But I won't tell you anything yet. You must see everything for yourself with your own eyes. But I hope he won't harm me. She really was scared. After all, you never know what you can expect from an angry husband. Don't worry, he won't cause any physical harm to you or anyone else. But you will see everything for yourself later. Barbara nodded her head, but the anxiety did not go away. The unknown scared her. But the woman's anxiety was also noticed by Bruno, who simply took her hand and, leaning towards her face, spoke quietly. Don't worry, Barbara. I'm also difficult and will always protect you. Do you understand me? His voice sounded different, not the same as always, but confident and tough. There was a sense of animal strength in him. This sent goosebumps down Barbara's arms. And looking at them, the woman noticed how the hairs stood on end. She simply nodded her head, mentally agreeing. But why lie to yourself? It was so nice when a man solves all your problems, when he takes responsibility for his own woman, home, and in general. But apparently Bruno's intonation somewhat frightened Barbara. And noticing the expression on her face, the man immediately spoke, quickly softening his intonation. "Barbara, I'm sorry if I scared you, but I'm really not a mama's boy or some guy from the village. I have a higher education, 3 diplomas, and work in a hospital. As fate would have it, he even became a novice in a monastery. But now I live here." Wow. Wow. You, Bruno, have a biography. But Barbara still wanted to say something when at that moment she received a call. Yes, someone knows how to interrupt a conversation, the woman thought. But looking at the mobile screen, she sighed heavily. Well, yes, who else could call her? Faithful hubby Anthony, who apparently cooled down after a fit of rage and decided to dial it. "Barbara, where are you?" The once beloved husband asked without words of greeting. "Anthony, why do you need this?" "Well, you have your polished girlfriend, so live with her. I will file for divorce myself. You don't have to worry." "Yeah, there's really nothing to worry about." "And will you also leave me the apartment, which, by the way, my parents bought?" "I'll leave it if the court agrees to give me a divorce." A minute of silence on the phone spoke eloquently. Anthony was calculating all the pros and cons, feverishly wondering what the catch was. "Barbara, tell me the whole truth." "What's the catch? You are giving me the apartment just like that, without trying to defend it for yourself. I'm not as mercantile as you." "Come on, how pious you are." The woman heard her husband's heavy, angry breathing on the phone, and could not understand how until now she had not noticed all this, all his anger and greed and lust. God, how blind she was. "And why are you silent? Or do you have nothing to say? Just imagine, there is something. Why do you think we haven't had children until now?" "I wonder why. You shouldn't answer though." "My dear husband, it's all my fault." "That's what you always said." "No, all this time I gave you one special herbal decoction, and thanks to it you could not get pregnant. And why? I didn't need a wife like you. You were picked up on the street like a puppy, warmed up and given a successful marriage. But why do I need a wife without family and tribe? A beggar who could not give anything to me and my children?" "Is that all you wanted to tell me?" said Barbara, surprised that she had not yet fainted from what she heard. "Yes," Anthony shouted into the phone. Barbara simply pressed the end button, not wanting to continue this conversation any further. She leaned her head against the warm wood of the house and closed her eyes. Lord, what an idiot and a brute she lived with all these years. And she firmly believed that he loved her, that everything would be fine with them. "Did your husband call?" Bruno looked at her carefully and nervously fingered a black rosary with a cross hanging on it in his hand. "Yes," he threatened, "and you are right, and Elsa. He gave me a very, very unpleasant surprise." So to speak, he opened his eyes and showed his own black insides. Elsa smiled and, raising an eyebrow, looked at the woman, as if asking, "And what did he tell you there?" Barbara sat with her eyes closed and didn't know whether to tell them or not everything that Anthony had told her. But all this put such pressure on her from within that she simply did not have the strength to remain silent. "Elsa, you can't imagine how hard my soul is right now. I just don't know how to live with this anymore. Tell me, maybe I can help you with advice. And I, if necessary, with my fists and a gun." Bruno sat closer to Barbara and took her hand in his. But the woman didn't even notice it. "You see, all this time while my husband and I lived, he slipped some herbs into my food or drink. I don't know where, and I couldn't get pregnant. And all this time, my husband bullied me and reproached me for being infertile, for not being able to consider myself a full-fledged woman and mother." A tear quietly rolled down her cheek, but only Elsa noticed her, who sat down next to her and quietly stroked her hand. "Nothing, Barbara, believe me. Every poison has its own antidote. Me and Bruno will help you feel good again. Do you think I can have children? What are you saying? And you don't need to understand me. With these words I conjure fear and sadness. But Bruno will bring water from my stream and we will drink tea. And then everything will be fine with you. By the way, let's go to the forest today. Can you help me find a fern flower? Today is the night when your deepest desires can come true." An hour later, the company went to the local lake, where almost the entire village had actually gathered. Wow, Barbara thought, looking around. There were tents with benches and tables around the lake. A variety of foods were cooked over an open fire, and there were trays and refrigerators with drinks and sweets. There was no crowd of young people. Don't be surprised. We have ethno-tourism at the highest level. And my experience and knowledge helped the villagers get on their feet, earn an honest living, and show guests a different side of village life and ancient wisdom. Honestly, I couldn't even think. Barbara, we also have swings installed on the field. Let's go for a ride. Swing? Doom. The woman's surprise knew no bounds. Yes, these type of boats on high poles. Believe me, it's very exciting. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the field, where indeed a high swing had already been installed, and people were crowding around it to take a ride with the breeze. Barbara and Bruno rode on boats, laughed like children, enjoying the wind in their hair, the night sky, and the fact that they could surrender to the holiday like this and not think about anything. And Barbara rejoiced like a child, not at all reproaching herself for being able to rejoice and enjoy freedom. I feel as good today as I have never felt in my life. And I'm not even the least bit ashamed of my actions, because I left my husband. I'm not even angry at him for his words, but for what he did. Because why? Bruno looked at her carefully and gently pulled her towards him, putting his arm around her shoulders. Because I'm finally free. Bruno leaned over and gently kissed her mulled wine-sweet lips, lightly and unobtrusively, trying not to frighten off such a moment of trust. The man was afraid that Barbara would push him away. But either nature or herbs or wine made her more pliable to her desires, which she always suppressed in herself, forcing her to respond to his kiss with a passionate and demanding kiss. Barbara, of course, I'm glad that you allowed me to kiss you. But let's not rush. And this is what a man tells me. It's strange, usually it's the partner who has to say it. But no, don't think anything like that. You are a beautiful woman. I like you very much. But I don't want you to regret your momentary weakness later. Barbara pulled away from Bruno but did not let go of his hand, but turned around and pulled him towards the lake. Then maybe we can go make wreaths and float them on the water. Let's go. They wove wreaths, threw them into the water, picked flowers and rejoiced at the night, like children lying on the grass and counting the stars in the sky. Good morning, Barbara. Bruno lay leaning on his hand and looked at her with a smile. Bruno, I hope you and I didn't sleep yesterday. I wanted to ask Barbara, but I didn't dare ask such a frank question. Weren't we asleep? No. You don't have to worry about this. We were by the river, weaving wreaths, counting the stars in the sky. You leaned on my shoulder and just fell asleep. Why didn't I bring you home? Well, because you asked me to take you here. Here is the answer to your question. How did we end up here? Yeah, I don't know, Bruno, what came over me yesterday. Probably your tea or local mulled wine. But I admit, it was the best day of my life. But Bruno, there is no need to spoil such a wonderful morning. Let's put this aside for a while. Then come on, get up. I'll prepare you a real rural breakfast at home. Oh, that already sounds great. Bruno helped his unexpected night companion get up and led her home again. They walked along a field path, smoothly turning into a rural road, and chatted about nothing. And Barbara more and more often caught herself thinking that she felt wildly, to the point of pain in her heart. She always wanted to walk like this, talk, and not think about anything. Barbara, what are you thinking about now? Bruno looked carefully into her face, hidden under the flowers of yesterday's flower. Yes, you just shine from the inside. Is it true? Yes, you know, Bruno, I want to tremble in my knees and just walk like that and not think about anything. Then I propose to meet the dawn in the field every morning. How do you like this idea? Unless, of course, you sleep until noon. No, and I don't sleep until noon. That's why I like the idea itself. And it's true. What can I say? Fate itself brought these two together. It was brought together in the most mysterious way when, a month after they met, Barbara and Bruno soon got married, and the local priest married them in an ancient wooden church, where many people from the village and surrounding towns came. This was the first wedding in this temple. And the clergyman himself said then, by combining this couple in a legal marriage, we launch into our hearts not only love, but also the piety of our Lord, love each other, be fruitful, and live happily ever after. Oddly enough, Barbara's ex-mother-in-law came to their wedding and was sincerely happy for her former daughter-in-law. She even asked Barbara for forgiveness when she was leaving and asked to come visit them. Things didn't work out for her son with Jadwiga. Anthony then took her to the station for the last time and asked, "Did you even love me?" Well, how can I tell you? Anthony probably loved her in her own way. But you yourself understand that you have nothing, because your parents gave all their property to Barbara. Why do I need this? If we had children, where would we live? In my apartment? Sorry, Anthony, but you can't build a family on such conditions. So the girl cheerfully kissed him goodbye on the cheek and jumped into her carriage, waving to him from the steps. Yeah, what a fool you were, Anthony. You lost everything you had, your wife who loved you, the opportunity to have children and a home, and his parents abandoned him. They simply stopped communicating and answering phone calls. But one fine evening this happened. Anthony, hi, this is Barbara. If you still remember. Anthony made me sweat and get goosebumps all over my body. Of course he remembered her and could not forget her. No matter how hard I tried, I immersed myself in my work. Drinking and partying, nothing helped. Hello, Barbara. Of course I remember hearing from my mother that you got married. Well, your free life didn't last long? Yes, not for long. That's not why I'm calling. Barbara thought for a minute whether she should have said this or not, but she still said, I want to thank you so much for bringing Jadwiga to our house, and I witnessed it. Otherwise, I would not have returned to this village, would not have decided to have a relationship with Bruno, and would not have gotten pregnant. Yes, Anthony, I am carrying twins under my heart, so thank you very much. From what he heard, Anthony's cheekbones twisted, they played with anger, but the man could not say anything in response. All this could have been his, but it never happened, and all due to my own stupidity. Is that all you wanted to tell me? Yes. Although no, I signed over the apartment that your parents registered in my name. So you can live in peace and build new relationships and tell her thank you very much. You can gloat. Jadwiga left me after a few days. Now I'm free like a bird. But when I meet her, I will definitely say your regards. Thank you, Anthony, and all the best to you. Barbara hung up, and Anthony just held the phone in his hand for a few more minutes and listened to the short beeps, not knowing how to react. No way. Barbara is happy. She has a new husband and 2 children, and he was left without a home and family. Even his relatives abandoned him, and he himself is to blame for this, because there is no one else to blame. But Bruno himself had a different opinion. Barbara, maybe you shouldn't have called him and told him all this. He gently hugged her shoulders, approaching her from behind. Bruno, you know, I've wanted to say this to his face for so long that I probably wouldn't be able to restrain myself. And as Elsa says, it's better to regret what you did than what you didn't do. As if your ex-hubby wouldn't do any harm. But you are with me. Barbara looked at her husband in bewilderment. With you. But Barbara, just understand, you can't always cause harm just by deeds. You can use an unkind word or a conspiracy. But that's it, you definitely got this from Elsa. Or maybe she has it too. But tomorrow I'll still go to her and let her give you a talisman. Which, I don't want your ex-husband to have any influence on you. He kissed his wife tenderly, stroked her rounded belly, and put his ear to it. Barbara, the children are already knocking their feet, asking to be brought into the world as soon as possible. And it's definitely a boy. By the way, what did we decide with the names? The woman smiled and looked at her husband. This issue has been on their agenda for a long time. And if they decided on the name for the girl Mary, in honor of the former mother-in-law, then they did not decide on the name for the boy. Let's ask Elsa. She will be our godmother, so let her give the boy a name herself. Barbara nodded her head in agreement with her husband and kissed him tenderly on the cheek. And really, is it worth arguing with the man you love when everything can be resolved with the help of a wonderful godmother? They stood on the shore of the lake and watched how the sun set in the field, how the winter sun hid behind the rare branches of still bare trees. Barbara was happy that now she had a person next to her who would not just say, I'm with you, but also protect her, lend her shoulder, and protect her from problems. And may everything be fine for everyone, even Anthony. Healthy, young, energetic people sometimes don't believe in the existence of disease. I mean, they know that someone gets sick and even dies. but it's mostly old people who've already lived their lives. Well, or those who were born sick, or those who ruin their own health. And young and healthy people just don't have time to be sick. That's what Marcus always thought. A young but already successful businessman, a happy husband and father, full of energy. The man who was barely over 30 felt sick. At first he didn't pay attention to it. It's nothing, a slight cold. Besides, he's overworked. You need to rest, sleep, and everything will pass. It's not like going to a doctor. He hadn't been to a polyclinic for ages. He didn't know how the doors opened. However, time passed, and it did not get better. On the contrary, some strange pains were added to his weakness. In the evening, he told his wife about it. He did not complain, but simply said that he felt somehow not very well, hoping for sympathy and maybe for some advice. But Camila was also young, healthy, and didn't believe anything could happen to them, especially men. Come on, it'll pass. What kind of sissies are you men? It's us women who have to put up with it all our lives. What's it to you? But no, just a pimple on your nose, you die right away. These words offended me, but also calmed me down. Really, why should he? Let's say he goes to the doctor, and what will he say? He didn't even realize what ails him, and there's no time to go to the doctor. He was doing business, sitting in the accounting department with an elderly, strict woman discussing financial matters, and she noticed something. You don't look so good lately, Mr. Marcus. How are you feeling? And he, as if pleased by the sympathy in the voice of a woman who was essentially a stranger, took it upon himself to tell her everything that was troubling him. The woman frowned. And you go to work. I have to go to the doctor. Not go, run. You can't treat your health like that. It's no business, Mrs. Megan said. How do you leave things alone? He objected. All the more reason to get treatment if you're worried about your case. Take some tests. Have you examined there? It may not be much of a problem. You'll take vitamins and have some injections, and then you'll be back on track. But if you let it go, and you don't get better, then you won't have much to do. Oh man, you always procrastinate until the last minute, and then we have to deal with you. That's just the way it is. Both my wife and my co-worker complain about men, but in different ways. One chases him to the doctor, the other, on the contrary, reproaches that he is fooling around and pays too much attention to his health. And somehow it stings that his wife won't bother with him. She doesn't want to hear about his ailments even now. She doesn't even want to sleep with him. She sent him to another room. I'm fed up. You sweat a lot at night. It's disgusting. You make me wake up all wet myself. So I guess Mrs. Megan's right, we should go. Maybe it's nothing. Soon it got really bad. He went to the doctor. He realized he had more than a simple problem, and the doctor realized it too, though he didn't say exactly what it was. Don't be frightened. I'm not saying that it is something terrible. It's just that you have to have a checkup to rule out all the risks. Without looking at Marcus, she wrote out a referral to the oncology center. On the way home, he thought about whether to tell his wife. She'd be scared. She'd probably cry. But how could he not tell her? He had to. Camila did not think to be frightened. She was rather angry. Here we go. Now they will drag you to hospitals, you'll see. I went to the doctor. I told you it wouldn't do any good. But what can I do when I'm so weak? And believe me, it's really bad, Marcus excused himself. Oh, come on, it's bad. You should know how people used to live. They knew only two medicines, vodka with pepper or vodka with salt, and they lived to be 100 years old, without ever seeing a doctor. And now you're running around to doctors. They, clever doctors, sense that a man with money will now pull from you without end. For every sneeze, expensive drugs prescribe until they will not rip off completely. And when you are left without everything, will send to die with peace of mind, she said. Why are you like this? They haven't taken a penny so far. Everything is covered by the policy, Marcus reassured her. So they haven't started treatment. The best part is yet to come. Now our money's going to fly. That's the only way. And the policy, haven't you heard? Free treatment. It used to be like that, and now it's no longer. No one will give you an enema without money. But it's not just about money. It's about my life. Do you really think I want you dead? It's all I want to see you cured. I just don't believe these doctors, she replied. But anyway, the treatment was started, and Camila was right. The money was spent very quickly. This is even before the final diagnosis is made, and finding out what was wrong with him needed to be done as soon as possible in order to start treatment. As a result, the doctor seemed to reassure, but at the same time added worries. You don't have cancer, thank God, but a disease that equates to it. The worst part is that you delayed treatment. The tumor could reborn at any moment, and then things would be much sadder. And Marcus began to live around clinics, hospitals, medical offices. When they put him in the clinic, it was even easier. At home, Camila, who seemed to have already resigned herself to the upcoming expenses and to the fact that her husband had started treatment, was very displeased. You see that all the problems started after you went to the doctor. It was not so bad for you before that, and now you are traveling from clinic to clinic. They cut you there, inject you here, just give you money. And who's going to work, uncle? You know you can't let go of this business for a minute. At least write me a power of attorney. I'll slowly get into it, make sure they don't steal everything. By the way, did you find out if it's contagious? At least me and my son, so that you don't reward us. It was hard to hear that. It seemed that his wife was the closest person to him, but he has nobody but her and his son. His parents are long dead, no sisters, no brothers. And she, Camila, never once asked him how he was feeling. She never went to see a doctor. And not only that, she's trying to keep her son away from him. Jasper's 7 years old. He's used to his daddy being with him all the time, but Camila's like, stay out of it. Dad's sick. Stay out of it. One day, Marcus even heard her tell Jasper to wean off Dad. I'm still alive, aren't I? Camila, why are you burying me alive? Unable to stand it, he once said. Who's burying you? Live 100 years, outlive us. If things go on like this, there'll be nothing to bury you with anyway. When you get well, we'll be begging. How do you like that prospect? Was all his wife said. And Marcus was surprised at how cruel his wife had become. He didn't want to talk to her. We didn't even want to see her. The hospital was better. People there, even if it was for duty or money, still expressed interest in his recovery. They're interested in his condition, cheer him up, give him hope. But his wife behaves as if he is already dead and is present only by mistake, although she herself is always away from home. Business is quite seriously engaged, and the child considered abandoned. It's good that Jasper is a quiet boy, from school to home. At home he sits with a book, or at the TV. Did you eat anything today, son? Dad asked, calling from the hospital. Of course I did, Dad. We have everything. And I take everything I want from the fridge myself. I eat sausage, cheese, cucumbers. How are you, Dad? Not recovered yet. And when will you come? I'm bored without you. Oh, Jasper. Jasper's the only person I know. What if your daddy never gets well, never comes back? Mom thinks a kid can eat sausage and he doesn't need anything else. I'd like to get well, come home alive and well. To go with her son on a hike, to a museum, just to walk down the street holding his hand. Will it ever come true? The doctors were reassuring, but there's been no improvement. More like the opposite. Maybe Camila's right. This treatment is useless. It's all just a waste of money. When Marcus was discharged from the hospital, the doctor said, well, we've done all we can. The tumor growth has stopped. Now you need to take a break from the treatment and the hospital environment and think. Surgery is necessary, but it's a fee-only operation. Try to raise the money, consult with your family, and the doctor named the amount of the operation, which made even Marcus, who was not a poor man, feel a little embarrassed. He didn't have that kind of money. It was possible to raise it, of course, but it was almost all he had. And the main thing is that it didn't depend on him alone. He has a wife, a son, who also need this money and will have to spend it on the operation. And it is not excluded, by the way, that it may end unsuccessfully, or simply not bring the desired result. Does he have the right to take that risk? If I refuse the operation, he asked the doctor, then recovery will be in doubt. I'm not saying you'll necessarily die, but your quality of life will deteriorate markedly. The doctor was still saying something, and in Marcus's ears was the voice of Camila, who was already prepared for the fact that he would be gone, and not even particularly worried about it at home. When he told his wife about the surgery, it turned out that Camila wasn't worried about her husband, but about the money. When she heard about the cost of the surgery, which could possibly save her husband's life, she splashed her hands. Marcus, are you crazy? It's an absolutely unbelievable amount of money. But it can still be raised, he said without much confidence. It can. And you know, darling, I haven't been idle since you got sick. I've studied the whole internet, learnt all about your illness and those who have had the same or similar diagnosis. And you know what happens to people. Exactly the same thing that's happening to you. Doctors pull money for treatment medication and then tell them they need expensive surgery. People give their last, they sell flats, cars, everything they have, ask kind acquaintances and relatives. And still they get the necessary amount of money. They undergo surgery. And then the relatives write, "Thank you all. The collection is closed. The operation did not help. The man died." "So you think I should just die without surgery?" Marcus asked. He didn't know how right his wife was, but her words seemed reasonable. "So you listen all the way through. There's this woman, she has a similar diagnosis. She had treatment at first. 2, trying to get money, and then she gave up. There is no money, the treatment is exhausting, and it is better to die peacefully than to suffer like this and make her family suffer. Well, she's still alive. Yeah, she's had her problems. You can't say she's healthy, but she's alive, she's working, she's raising her kids, she's been living peacefully for a few years now. So if you're going to die, it'll probably be from the operation. But you'll leave me and my son destitute, and if you don't waste any more money, you'll still live. But yeah, you're right. I guess I don't really want to go under the knife myself, especially since it's really money, and there's no guarantee. You see," Camila visibly cheered up. "And the guarantee? Yes, that's ridiculous. They'll give you any kind. They all promise because they know you won't make a claim anyway. If anything. And even if I tried, I wouldn't be able to. Doctors don't give away their own. It's like the mafia. So lie down, rest at your leisure. Would you like me to tell you how things are going at the firm?" "No need, I'll tell you later." Marcus lay down and turned his back to the wall. He was no longer interested in the company's affairs. Everything had fallen to the 2nd, 5th, 10th plan. Nothing that pertained to life was relevant to him anymore. Camila seems to be doing business wisely. That's fine. But what about him? Might he survive, like some unknown woman? Or maybe he'll die. That's fine. Everyone dies. No one gets out of here alive. Camila, leaving her husband to rest, was ready to rejoice. She had talked her husband out of the operation, and even without much effort. She had a clever way of thinking of people with similar illnesses. He didn't even think to ask me to show him the information. Well, there was something similar, though not exactly the same, but that doesn't matter. Surely there must be people like that. Both those who died and those who survived. Who knows why they survived? It's a matter of who's fated. If it's meant to be, Marcus will survive. She didn't really want the man she'd once loved to die. Well, maybe not much, but she'd been with him for almost 10 years. Life is changing now, but it's for the best. The main thing now is to keep Marcus as long as possible, at least not very ill. I don't want to have to look after him. Or else what's a man to suffer for nothing? "Mom, has Dad recovered yet?" quietly asked the son who had entered unnoticed. "Oh, why are you sneaking around? You scared me." "Yes, recovered almost. Don't you see he is resting now? And go do your own thing, play something. I have things to do, I'm running away now. I'll come back tonight." Jasper was used to this attitude and just as quietly left the room. He loved his dad, realized that he was still a long way from full recovery. And the fact that Mom was happy wasn't because of Dad at all. She had always been in a good mood when he was in hospital before. Marcus stayed at home to recover, according to his wife, or to get sicker. It was up to him. Camilla was rarely at home. She took little interest in her husband's health. Only in the evening she would come in and ask, "How are you?" But she didn't listen to any answers. He spent his days with his son, cooked soups and porridge for him. I talked, read books, watched TV together. His strength was less and less every day, but he, who had refused the operation, did not think about any treatment. He took his medication more like a machine. One day Camilla, looking critically at her husband, was surprised. "Do you even go out? You can't stay at home without leaving the house. It will make you even more unstable." "I can't walk anymore. I can hardly walk to the kitchen." "You're not strong enough. That's why you're sitting at home. Physical activity means a lot too. Come on, start walking. Although you won't have anything to walk in now. How did you shred though? Your skin and bones, you could lose any trousers. You know, we should put you in something decent. They're waiting for you at work too, always asking for you. I'm sure you'll be there soon. We need to order a suit to fit, so you don't walk around like a ragamuffin," Camilla said businesslike. "Do what you want," Marcus replied, who didn't have the energy to argue or just talk to his wife. It was rather odd, of course, that she thought as if her husband would ever return to work in life. And Camilla hadn't thought of making her husband a suit at all. She decided for the funeral, judging by the look of him, it should be soon. Marcus had been a rather sturdy, dense man in the past. Now there was literally half of him left. Of course, for a funeral it doesn't matter, but in one that's big, what difference does it make? Still, the man is not the last man. Surely former colleagues, friends will come to the funeral. They'll see him. They'll say she didn't take care of him, and she still has to work with these people. And she depends on a lot of them. So it will have to, do not want to want, and think about how to dress her husband decently to see him off to his last journey. You can't take him to a shop, of course, nor to an atelier. But if you can't bring the client to the master, you'll have to bring the master to the client. So Camilla decided and went to the atelier alone. There she went to one of the dressmakers who had been recommended to her as a good master of men's suits. This woman, who was about the same age as Camilla, introduced herself as Jennifer. "I need to make a nice men's suit for my husband," Camilla said immediately. "That's fine, but in order to do that, you have to bring him in to be measured." "That's the problem. Bringing him over I can't. He's seriously ill and hardly ever leaves the house. So I'm going to ask you to come to our house and get measured there." "We don't actually do that," Jennifer shrugged. "I understand. But for someone who's sick, it's not like I have to carry him here on a stretcher. We don't live that far from here. And besides, I'll pay for the extra trouble. I'll pay very handsomely." That promise was a decisive one for Jennifer. She was in constant need of money, raising her daughter alone, constantly looking for some kind of part-time work, as orders had been scarce lately. And the invitation of this beautiful and well-groomed client came in handy. Yes, and felt sorry for her, so young, beautiful, and her husband, apparently, and really seriously ill. However, it is not clear why he needs a suit. But the dressmaker decided that it was none of her business, wrote down the address, and promised to come in the evening. She was met at the posh flat by the landlady, who was indeed grateful that Jennifer had agreed to come. "You don't worry, there will be no complaints about the quality. My husband is really seriously ill, so I'm afraid he won't be going anywhere in this suit, and he won't complain if something inside is wrong. The main thing is to make it look good on the outside." Jennifer felt uneasy. She realized that the suit was probably being ordered for a funeral. Well, such orders had happened before, except she'd never had to take the measurements of a dying person before. "Come on, I'll introduce you to my husband," Camilla said affably. As she entered the room, she exclaimed cheerfully, "There's Jennifer. She's going to make you a new suit that you won't be ashamed to wear out in public." Marcus stepped up to meet his guest, and both of them met their gazes and were stunned. Yes, they had known each other before, in their early youth, and not just known each other. They had a love affair. Marcus and Jennifer were getting married. Jennifer had just started college and Marcus was graduating. They met and were together for almost a year, never parting for a day. And at that moment, when the question of the wedding was almost decided, there was a catastrophic quarrel. The reason was, of course, jealousy. Marcus saw his beloved talking on the street with another guy, made a scene. But then, for the first time, Jennifer was able to justify herself. Yes, it's just a fellow student. We were walking from class together. What's the big deal? We were talking about classes, about professors. To be honest, she hid from Marcus that this classmate was courting her, and even confessed his love. She refused him, confessing that she was already marrying someone else. However, the young man did not abandon his intentions, and soon Marcus saw them together again, and not just walking together. The guy hugged her and kissed her. That was enough. Marcus decided that Jennifer was cheating on him, spoke rudely, and said he didn't want to deal with a girl who let other men woo her so easily. I don't know if you had something with him or not. It doesn't even matter. The important thing is that you easily let him have his way. I've seen that. What on earth did you see? I didn't expect him to do that myself. We were just walking beside each other, she excused herself, crying. Well, yeah, just walking next to each other. Then we just hugged and kissed and just woke up together. I'm sorry, Jennifer. If things like that don't matter to you and you have it easy, then I don't see what else we have to talk about. Jennifer hoped that she would still be able to convince her lover of her fidelity, but he didn't want to listen to her anymore. She took the documents from the institute and went home to her village, and there she realized she was pregnant. When her parents found out, they said, "We don't want such a daughter. You can go to the one you got pregnant with. We don't need such a disgrace. We let our daughter go to school. They'll laugh at us. Go wherever you want. But don't come here without your husband. We won't let you on the doorstep anyway." And Jennifer went back to town. Certainly not to the man she'd been fooling around with. She wasn't going to go back to Marcus and apologize to him again. But she'd left the institute, which meant she'd been evicted from her dormitory. She had to live somewhere. She went to college, where she learned to be a dressmaker. Found a job. Gave birth to a daughter. Got a place in the family hostel. She worked hard and as a result was able to save money for her own place. She bought a small flat in a not the best neighborhood. But it was still her own property, which she hoped could be exchanged for something better. She hadn't seen Marcus again since the fight, nor had she tried to find him, even to let him know he had a child. She was sure she would never see her daughter's father again. And here he was in front of her, miserable, haggard, obviously gravely ill, and married to a woman who was already so resigned to his near death that she had ordered a suit for the funeral. Of course, they didn't pretend to know each other. Jennifer began to take the measurements, wishing she could get out of this house as soon as possible. It pained her to see Marcus in such a state. Besides, she realized that he was probably going to die soon. There was nothing she could do to help except sew this most unfortunate suit, doing what was required of her. Jennifer said her goodbyes and left, barely holding back her tears. The only time she gave vent to her feelings was at home alone. After all, Marcus was her first and only love. He was also the father of her daughter Elizabeth, who looked so much like him. And Jennifer didn't even have any pictures left to show her daddy. Now he would most likely die, and they would never meet again. But how can this be? Crying bitterly, Jennifer thought. Why does his wife seem so carefree, even cheerful? After all, when a loved one is at death's door, there's no fun to be had. Isn't that so? She's having fun, rejoicing, giggling, ordering a suit for his funeral, instead of fighting for the person she loves. After all, they are clearly not poor people, and money can solve many problems nowadays. You can even go abroad if necessary. Then the daughter came back from school. She immediately noticed that her mother was crying. "Mom, what's wrong with you? Your eyes are like this. Did something happen at work? Or did someone hurt you?" Elizabeth was very attached to her mom, always taking care of her, trying not to upset her. And it was even hard for her to imagine that someone had hurt her mom, so kind and wonderful. "No, Elizabeth, it's okay. I cried because I learned that a friend's husband was ill, and very seriously. So I felt sorry for them," Jennifer explained. Elizabeth believed, and then they calmed down and began to discuss their business. As she put her daughter to bed, Jennifer thought again about Marcus and what they still had in common. Whether he died or survived didn't matter. I probably shouldn't hide from Marcus that he has a daughter. He has a right to know that. After all, I'm not going to file for child support, claim an inheritance. I don't want anything. Just that he knows about his daughter, and that she knows who her father is, Jennifer pondered. So we should meet, tell him the whole truth, and then let him decide what to do. I don't think his wife will be too upset, especially if she finds out that there's no threat to her well-being. The fact that her husband could die at any moment seems to be the least of her fears. That's what Jennifer thought, but she didn't know how she was going to talk to Marcus alone. However, that wasn't much of a problem either. A few days later, she called. "I'm sorry, Camila, but I guess I'll have to come again. I have already cut out the suit and started sewing, and I have a doubt whether the sleeves will be too short. I'm afraid a preliminary fitting and adjustment is necessary." "Yes, please do come. I won't be home though, but I'll warn both my husband and son, and they'll let you in, and you do what you need to do." Jennifer was more than satisfied with this, and she hurried off with the unfinished suit to Marcus. In the meantime, he too was plagued with doubts. Of course, he recognized Jennifer, and long-forgotten feelings awoke in his soul. How come they're not together? And whose fault was that? It appeared that he had hurt her himself. He didn't look for her after she left the institute and went somewhere unknown. The neighbors at the dormitory said that she was going home to her village. Apparently she did, because he never saw Jennifer again. But now, it turned out she was living in town, working as a dressmaker and sewing him a suit. Marcus guessed why Camila had decided to order him a suit. She was probably not just resigning herself to his imminent death, but hastening it. And why wouldn't she? He had already realized that she had taken control of the firm, decided that she was the rightful owner, and not without reason. She would be the owner after his death. And judging by her mood, you can understand that she is not really afraid that her husband will die. It's quite possible that she even has a candidate to replace him. If I'd stayed with Jennifer, it wouldn't have been like this, Marcus thought. Surely she wouldn't have waited listlessly for me to die, especially not with the money. Why did I refuse the operation? After all, it's still quite possible to pay for it now. And all of Camila's assurances that she and Jasper would go their separate ways are hardly worth anything serious. There should be plenty of money left to live on. In fact, I could still change my mind and agree to the operation. But does it all matter now? Jennifer's making a suit, she's giving it to Camille. All I have to do is wait to die. And I can't even talk to her, Jennifer. It's a good time to make up for past mistakes. At least die with peace of mind. And just as he was thinking about it, his wife rang. "How do you miss me?" "The dressmaker is coming today with a suit to try on. Don't forget to open the door." "Okay, sure," Marcus replied, trying to contain his joy. Just now he'd been thinking about how he could talk to Jennifer, and here she was coming herself. Probably to try on a costume, probably wanted to talk too. He looked forward to her visit. And here she came. "Jennifer, darling, I was so sorry we didn't talk then. I have something to say to you. Come on in. We'll decide about the costume later." "What about the suit?" "There's nothing wrong with it. I wanted to talk to you too. I have something to say." "Marcus, tell me what's wrong with you. Why do you look like that? What are you sick with?" Jennifer had come of her own accord, but she didn't know where to start the conversation. She was really concerned about Marcus' condition. But there was nothing she could do to help anyway. They needed to talk about something else. He felt the same way, and so he brushed the question aside. "What's the matter with me? I am ill, as you see, and very seriously, what to speak of. I wanted to talk about something else. I must ask your forgiveness. I realize it was all my fault, and I didn't really think you were cheating on me." He didn't know how to talk about the main thing, about what was bothering him so much. "But something maybe I should apologize too. I got wound up then too and took offense and went away. Then I came back to town, but I didn't look for you." "Why would I?" "I was pregnant." "Yes, that's why I couldn't stay in the village." "You mean you were supposed to have a baby and you didn't tell me?" Marcus was confused. "Yes, as it happened, it happened. Just had a baby girl, Elizabeth. She's 9 now. That's why I came today. I reckon you should know about having her, Jennifer admitted. Oh my God, I have a daughter as well. And I have a son. Jasper, he's 7. Turns out there's an older daughter as well, Marcus whispered in amazement. Yeah, here I brought pictures of her. She looks just like you. By the way, I wanted to ask for a picture of you to show her too. Otherwise, she doesn't even know what her daddy looks like. I'd like you two to meet, but I don't know how to arrange it. After all, your wife would probably be against it. You probably meant to say that we won't have time to get acquainted. As you can see, I'm not in the best of shape, and I may not be around anytime soon. But that's where I started. Marcus, how can that be? After all, you're not a poor man. I can tell. You have such a swanky flat. And I understand you've got a good job. Can't the doctors do anything? They can cure a lot of diseases nowadays. They send them abroad, they get medicines after all. Well, I don't know anything about it, but I've read about it. People have to raise money. And do you have any? Yes, I do. And as the doctors say, you don't even have to go anywhere special. They can do the operation at our clinic. But it costs a lot, of course, and I can generally pay for it. My wife is against it. She's afraid that the operation won't help anyway, and she and her son will go to the world, Marcus confessed. What on earth is that? How can a wife say that? What is she afraid of? What could be scarier than the death of the dearest person? And why do you put up with it? Are you not capable? Can't you agree to this operation yourself? Your life depends on it. You should be the first to fight for yourself and not listen to anyone. I mean, I don't know what's going on. Maybe your wife does have reason to be afraid. But do you really think you can just die like that? You have a little boy. Don't you want to live for him? Don't you think he needs you? Jennifer said eagerly. I guess you're right, Marcus muttered. I think about it sometimes, but I guess I've been too little preoccupied with my condition, namely about my son. Well, of course he needs me. I can see for myself what he'll be without me. Camilla. She's not a bad woman, as you might think, just selfish. Apparently she thinks only of herself, without noticing anyone else around her. Well, you see, and you should be thinking about yourself and your son. And then, by the way, what's in her head doesn't matter, but she just doesn't know how awful it is to be alone. I sometimes think for her my death would not be the worst case scenario at all. She's either resigned to it, or well, I don't know. I don't want to say anything bad about her. I have no right to judge your wife either. I just don't understand her at all. But beyond that, I think it's up to you. I'm a stranger in your life altogether, Jennifer said, covering her face with her hands. Yes, I realize that myself. And you're not an extra person in my life at all. You're the mother of my daughter. Marcus looked at the picture of Elizabeth again. She does look like me and my mom too. Yes, I have to live for my son and for my daughter. And I don't know myself what came over me when I agreed with Camilla. I'm sorry. I guess I'm a little tired. I'm going to lie down. I don't feel so good. Should we call a doctor? Jennifer said worriedly. You don't have to. I've got medication. I'll call the doctor myself right now, and I'll be sure to call and agree to the surgery. I hope it's not too late to get it done. While they were talking, Jasper came in from school, peered into the room, and realized that Dad was busy. Jennifer was in a hurry. Her daughter was due in soon too. She needed to meet her. They said their goodbyes. Marcus really thought about his future in a new way. He didn't want to die anymore. He wanted to live, to beat the disease, to raise his son and meet his daughter, and maybe mend his relationship with Jennifer. With Camilla, though, he didn't even know what would happen now. We'd have to see how she would react to his decision. He called the doctor and informed her of his agreement. I hesitated for a long time, but now I've decided that it's necessary to do the operation. Do you think I'm not too late? I hope not too late. But you need to go back to the clinic and be re-examined. What date do you want to be hospitalized? Tomorrow, Marcus said. And the doctor realized that he was indeed ready. His voice didn't sound as depressed as it had before. He really had the will to live. When Camilla had come in, he had told her his decision immediately, and she had been horrified. "Marcus, you have decided to ruin Jasper and me completely after all. Don't you realize how dangerous this is? You'll die during the operation or immediately afterwards. What will happen to us?" "Nothing will happen to you. You'll still have the money. And I, if I agree, will have the chance I'm depriving myself of by refusing the operation. And I'm sorry, I don't think I'm going to die. And you don't have to finish that suit." The tailor left it lying around. "I realized why you decided to order it." After this conversation, Camilla paced irritably around the flat. She had already sorted everything out. She had talked her husband out of the operation, prepared for the funeral, bought herself a mourning dress. And now he's changed his mind. And he really changed. He was lying there with no strength, and now he's suddenly perked up. I wonder what's got into him. Little Jasper came in the way. "Mummy, is Daddy going into hospital again?" The boy had apparently heard bits and pieces of his parents' conversation. "Your daddy's going to go to the hospital. He wants to ruin us. He doesn't know where and why. But he'll leave us penniless." "Did he say anything to you when you came home from school?" she asked irritably. "I didn't say anything. We hardly spoke to him at all. He talked to that aunt who made his suit for him for a long time." "What on earth are you saying? What's that supposed to mean? He's barely breathing himself, and he's having affairs with some dressmakers. You can't say anything. Well done, your daddy." Camilla dismissed the child and rushed into her husband's room. "Well, tell me, darling, what is it that has affected you so much? Was it the conversation with that dressmaker? Come on, don't be shy, tell me. What tales did she tell you?" "Stop it. Nobody told me anything. Don't I have the right to want to live?" "Well, I do. And I've already arranged for the operation. I'm not canceling anything. And if you're really interested, fine, I'll confess. This is the woman who made me believe in recovery. We knew each other once. Well, you don't need to know any more than that. One thing I can say is that I want to live and I will fight for my life," Marcus said firmly. However, Camilla was not used to backing down. Not even the fact that her husband was seriously ill stopped her. What did it matter when her plans were ruined? First, she made an ugly scene with Marcus himself. Then she called Jennifer. "Why did you leave your costume at our house?" "I decided not to finish it." "How could you bitch, meddle in other people's business?" "I don't know what you said to my Marcus. But just know this, you'll never have it your way. He's my husband, and you can rest assured that he will remain so." "I have nothing against it," Jennifer replied in an even tone. "And I really hope Marcus will finally stop dancing to your tune. He's still a young man and needs to live, even if you don't like it. And please don't call me again." She hung up. "All right, darling, we'll see which side wins. Surgery is a good thing, but it's not a sure thing that it will help. Besides, we're still running out of time. And just because the doctors agreed to operate on him doesn't mean anything. They decided to pay the money, so they cut and stitch him up for money, and then you're done. But he thinks in vain that I'll take care of him after that. I'll even give him a glass of water. I won't bury him either. I'll say there's nothing to bury him with. All the money for treatment. Let that kind dressmaker bury him wherever she wants, even in her garden. And I'll sue the doctors. Why did they cut a man if they couldn't save him anyway?" Camilla thought angrily. However, she still hoped to dissuade her husband. "Well, don't you realize that my first concern is for you? You are too weak. How will you survive this operation? Let's say you will. And then what? It's not certain that you'll be a healthy person. You'll probably just lie there motionless. And who's going to look after you? Don't count on me, I'm telling you. Let that dressmaker look after you." "I realized a long time ago that there is no hope for you, Camilla. So calm down. I'll do without you," was all Marcus said, who had long since had enough of these arguments with his wife. He could not be dissuaded. A few days later, the operation was done and was quite successful. But at the end, the unexpected happened. Marcus fell into a coma. Camilla, in the image of a grieving wife, ran to the hospital and immediately began to scandalize the doctor. "What do you mean in a coma? You took him in consciousness. You promised to do an operation after which he would be alive and well. But you just turned him into an immobile body. What do we do now? There he lies, not a man, not a dead man. And how am I going to live with a little baby in my arms, by the way? There's nothing you can do about it. It's no one's fault. It's just the way things are. He'll come out of the coma, I hope. But when? No one knows. Maybe tomorrow, maybe a year from now, the doctor explained to her. In what year? And what am I supposed to do during that year? Pay for this life support system like you're suggesting I do. You've already taken all the money for the surgery as it is. I don't have a penny. I can't pay. So either keep him alive for free or shut it down. I'd rather bury him than deal with a man in his condition. I'm sure he'll need care afterwards. With these words, she turned round and left, without even looking into the intensive care ward where her husband was lying. She didn't care at all. Anger overwhelmed her. After all, everything turned out exactly as she said. The operation had not helped, but it turned him into a helpless body. And the money, by the way, was gone, and a lot of it, and all her plans had collapsed. After all, how it was all calculated. Camila thought she would bury her husband soon and then finally marry the man she loved. Yes, she'd had another for a long time, who was also bored with his role as a lover. She had kept him by her side lately, with nothing but gifts and cash infusions. She just needed an official marriage. And now it turns out, and no money, and the wedding will not be. You can't divorce a man when he's in a helpless position. Camila also cared about her reputation, but about the lack of money, she still somewhat exaggerated. The firm remained, she continued to be practically a full owner. And it remained to be seen whether her husband would come out of his coma or not. One must, ahead of events, seize the moment. Marcus, from the looks of things. Anything is to be expected. Camila decided not to wait, but to withdraw as much money as possible into her account. Even if her husband didn't die, she wasn't going to live with him and would file for divorce. Really, how much longer do I have to ruin my life? Years go by, youth passes. You will not notice how life will pass, and next to whom? That loser Marcus, who's sick and between life and death. I'm a perfectly normal woman and I want to live preferably with the person I love, not with just anyone, she thought as she walked home from the hospital. She didn't even notice that Jennifer was outside the doctor's office, also concerned about Marcus. Jennifer was there and she heard Camila talking to the doctor and realized that the man she loved was in mortal danger. She too went to the doctor and asked about the condition of the patient. The doctor repeated to her all the same things he had told Camila and voiced the cost of keeping Marcus alive. Jennifer was horrified. She certainly didn't have that kind of money. But what will we do if no one pays? He'll have to die, she asked in despair. You see, it's not up to me here. This machine is not my own. With all my desire, I can't do anything about it. Of course, something free can be applied, but it is far from certain that it will save him. We can only hope that the patient will come to his senses and be able to breathe on his own. Although if his health is so important to you, you can announce a fundraiser, apply to foundations, or find funds somehow. I'm sorry, of course. In this situation, it's the only way out. I'll get that money, Jennifer said firmly. A desperate plan already matured in her mind. Just please don't you dare switch it off. He has to live for sure. He has 2 children after all. What she had in mind was frightening Jennifer herself. She had decided to sell the only thing she had, her flat. Yeah, it wouldn't fetch much, especially since it would have to be done quickly. But still it will give at least some respite from the death of a loved one. She and her daughter would have to live somewhere, and she had no one to rely on. But Jennifer didn't see it that way. She hoped for Marcus, that he would come to his senses, and that the money she would raise would be enough to save his life. And if it's not enough, what if I lose everything again? But at least my conscience will be clear. I did everything I could. Jennifer came home and immediately started selling the flat and was soon able to pay the necessary amount to the clinic. Marcus, meanwhile, remained all the same. Camila, of course, was busy with her own affairs and was not interested in her husband's condition. She was just waiting for the hospital to call her and tell her to take care of her husband's funeral. And that's when I'll tell them who should be in charge of his funeral. They lied to me completely, and now it's my fault, she thought. Jennifer visited Marcus every day at the hospital. She took time off work and sat with him for hours, talking to the man she loved, telling him about her life without him, sharing her dreams for the future. She thought Marcus couldn't hear her, so she could talk to him about anything without embarrassment. He wouldn't remember anything once he came to his senses. And what happens afterwards? Suppose he returns to his wife and son. It doesn't matter much. She's had enough of this happiness. She still met her beloved, was able to help him, was by his side for a while. Maybe even after he comes to his senses, Camilla will not want her husband back. She was the first to notice, without any doctors and examinations, that Marcus' condition was improving. He did not come to his senses immediately, but the doctor examined him and said that the situation was better. The dynamics was there, which meant that the wait was not long. And indeed, Marcus woke up and was very happy to see his love by the bed. "Jennifer, are you here? And I felt you were always there, didn't I?" he said in a weak voice. "I was talking to you." "Did you hear?" she asked. "I don't know, but I think I heard. You told me about Elizabeth, too, when she was very little. I remember that one." Oh. Tears of joy streamed down Jennifer's face. Marcus had finally come to his senses, and hopefully he would be well soon. Finally out of the hospital, healthy and strong as he had once been. It didn't even matter to her that he might not be going to her. But Marcus, coming more and more to his senses, didn't even ask about his wife. Apparently he realized she hardly visited him and worried about his condition. It turned out that she was worried about his condition, but only about material things. While Marcus was in the hospital, she managed to reissue all the documents, transfer to herself all his money, as well as the company, which she sold. By the time Marcus was discharged, their flat had been sold as well. Camilla was already packing. Her reputation apparently no longer bothered her. She had decided to make a complete break with her old life. "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus wondered, entering the trash flat. "I think we're still married. How could you sell something without my consent?" "That's easy. You think we're still married. I think I divorced you in absentia. It's very simple. You can do anything you want for money. You can marry, divorce, or die. You did a totally unnecessary operation. I told you not to do it. If you don't care what I think, I don't care what you think. And don't worry too much. You're keeping most of your stuff. I'm going away with my new husband. Far away. I'll leave you some money too. Enough for the first time. Maybe you'll earn it later. If you're a healthy man now, of course. If you're sick, lie down and die. By the way, you can keep your son too. I'm not going to babysit him." Jasper was glad to see his daddy back. He ran up to him and stood hugging him tightly, looking at his mother unkindly. "Dad, I'm staying with you, aren't I? You're not going to leave me anywhere. I don't want to be with her, especially not with another dad." "He's mean in general," Jasper said. "Of course we'll be together, son. Everything you've done, Camilla, let it stay with you. I don't care about that right now. I have a new life starting myself, and it will certainly be a happy one. I am very glad for you. All the best," and Camilla picked up the bales of her belongings and left the flat. Marcus called Jennifer and told her the latest news. "That's the way it is, Jennifer. I'm left with almost nothing. Well, I mean with my son, the bare minimum of money, some stuff I don't know where to put since the flat is gone." "Marcus, that's all nonsense. I really don't have a flat now either. I rent a dorm room. I think you can do the same or come and visit us. Elizabeth and I are waiting for you and Jasper too." So unexpectedly and unusually, the family didn't worry about past losses. The important thing was that they were all together, loving each other. What more could they want? Marcus didn't have to rent a dorm room. He rented a small but cozy flat where he and Jennifer and their 2 children could live. The money Camilla had left him and the money he'd made from the sale of his belongings were enough for that. It was necessary to get used to the usual simple life, to find a job, to take care of the children and each other. Camilla and her beloved were not going to go abroad forever. They went on a cruise. The money was enough for this trip, and for life after it. At least that's what she thought. But apparently she miscalculated. Or he, who was almost Camilla's husband, had his own plans. Soon after his return, he found another lady of his heart and left Camila alone, without a flat and almost without money. Realizing that she could not survive on her own, she started to look for her ex-husband, hoping that if he would not take her back, he would at least help her in some way. He is a working man. He is probably not poor. She was not wrong about that. Marcus was doing well, but she couldn't expect him to take her back. While his ex-wife had been away, he'd managed to terminate her parental rights. This was not affected by the fact that one day it turned out that Jasper was not Marcus's own son. The boy fell ill, had his blood tested, and it turned out that he could not be his father's own son. Marcus took a DNA test, and it came back positive. Jasper wasn't his son. Even Camila had lied about that. But what did it matter? After all, he was the one who had raised the boy from birth. Elizabeth was his own daughter, and he was just beginning to get to know her. But he had always thought of his son as his own, and continued to do so, even after the truth was revealed. It had no effect on his attitude. Nor did it affect his refusal to give Jasper to the returning Camila. However, his son had no intention of going back to her himself. "My mom's Jennifer," he said, "and you left with that uncle, so live with him." So Camila left with nothing, once again hoping to build her new life without money, without a child, and without the man she loved. But Marcus, having a rich experience in business and connections, quite quickly reached the position of a top manager and gradually created his own company. A year later, they had already moved into their own spacious flat and no longer needed anything.